Picture this: falling asleep, not with tension in your chest or noise in your head, but with a deep sense of calm, knowing that your mind is not your enemy, it's your home. What if peace wasn't something you had to chase during the day, but something you could plant into your subconscious each night, like a seed that grows while you rest? But let's be honest, how many nights have you spent replaying old mistakes, worrying about tomorrow, or just lying awake, unable to shut off your thoughts? You try to relax, but your brain keeps running like a machine that forgot how to power down. The truth is, the way your mind works while you sleep is just as important as what you do while you're awake. If your thoughts are full of pressure, judgment, or fear, even sleep won't bring relief. But if you learn how to reprogram your mind before bedtime with the right teachings, the right guidance, and the right stillness, then peace becomes your natural state, not something you have to fight for. Tonight, you're not just going to fall asleep. You're going to learn how to let go while you sleep. You're going to understand how to stop overthinking, how to release control, and how to rest your mind into true silence. These aren't just ideas, they're practices rooted in ancient Buddhist wisdom, designed to gently shift your inner world without force. So get ready, because for the next 3+ hours, your sleep will become a doorway to transformation. Before we begin, make a promise to yourself right now. Type in the comments: "Tonight, I release. I choose peace. I am free." This isn't just a sentence, it's a signal to your nervous system, a quiet declaration that your inner peace matters. The more you say it, the deeper it goes. So write it, feel it, and then let's begin this journey together. And now that the door is open, that space between your noise and your peace, it's time to walk through it. You've made the choice to surrender, to shift from force to flow, from control to clarity. But where does that shift begin? Right here, with a single misunderstood habit of the mind, the urge to solve every thought that passes through. Tonight, we begin with the thought that didn't need solving. Some thoughts enter like guests. Others break in like thieves. But the truth is, neither one can stay unless the door is held open. The habit of trying to fix, explain, or figure out every thought is not peace. It's mental tension dressed in the costume of control. And here's the deeper truth. Not all thoughts are meant to be solved. Some are only meant to pass. But most minds don't know how to let them. It starts early. From childhood, the brain is taught that thoughts are problems, and problems need answers. Crying is met with, "What's wrong?" Silence is met with suspicion. Confusion is met with analysis. And over time, the mind becomes a mechanic, trying to fix everything that arises, even when nothing is broken. That's where suffering begins, in compulsive fixing. But peace is not found in control. It's found in non-interference, in letting thoughts appear and disappear like clouds moving through a windless sky. To practice non-interference is not to be passive. It's to become clear. It's to watch without grabbing, to feel without gripping, and to think without drowning. The thought that says, "What if something bad happens?" does not need a solution. It needs space. The thought that whispers, "You're not good enough," doesn't require argument or rebuttal. It requires stillness. Thoughts only stick when they are believed, fed, or fought with. The more you try to solve a thought, the more you feed it. The more you analyze it, the more you energize it. It's like trying to put out a fire by blowing on it. The more attention it gets, the more it grows. But when you don't interfere, when you let it rise and fall like a wave that doesn't find resistance, it fades on its own. Peace doesn't come from fixing. It comes from seeing clearly without grabbing. The human mind has over 6,000 thoughts per day. Not all of them are kind. Not all of them are wise. Some are echoes of childhood wounds. Some are random fragments from a conversation you forgot you overheard. Some are pure noise. And yet, the moment they appear, the ego treats them like messengers with urgent meaning. What does this say about me? What if it's true? How do I fix this? That's the trap. The moment you try to decode every message, you forget that some envelopes are empty. Some don't need to be opened at all. Training the mind to rest in non-interference doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you stop arguing with thoughts as if they are facts. You stop treating discomfort like a crisis. You stop assuming that every internal storm needs a shelter. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, not in laziness, but in stillness. In Buddhist mindfulness, this is known as bare attention. It means watching thoughts arise without adding commentary. Seeing a sad memory and letting it be sad, without needing it to become happy. Letting the mind speak without needing to answer back. It's like watching cars pass on a road. Some are noisy, some are broken, some are beautiful, some are strange. But you do not need to chase every one of them. The wise mind knows that awareness is not about chasing, it's about staying. And the longer you stay, the more the mind reveals its real nature, open, clear, undisturbed. Underneath the thoughts, there is always stillness. But it can only be found by those who stop digging. The reason the mind tries to solve everything is because it confuses activity with safety. It believes that if it can find the answer, it will be okay. But what if peace isn't in the answer? What if it's in letting the question dissolve? Intrusive thoughts are often just energy looking for attention. They are loud because they know the mind is used to listening. But if they are met with silence, not cold indifference, but warm awareness, they lose their shape. They pass like wind through open fingers. Letting go of compulsive solving also means letting go of control. That's the part that frightens most people. Control feels like protection, but in truth, it's tension. The tighter you grip your mind, the more tangled it becomes. Freedom begins when you trust that not every knot needs untying. Some loosen on their own when you stop pulling. That's the essence of non-interference. Not trying to win the battle, but stepping away from the war entirely. This practice isn't about giving up. It's about waking up. Waking up to the fact that your thoughts are not you. That your peace doesn't depend on controlling them. That your value doesn't rise and fall with their approval. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah once said, "You see the river flowing, but you don't have to get in and swim with every leaf." That's what the peaceful mind understands. Thoughts will come. Thoughts will go. You are not required to swim with them. The question then becomes, how do you train this? How do you let go of the urge to fix? The answer lies in practice, gentle, repeated, and consistent. The next time a painful thought arises, don't run from it. Don't fight it. Sit with it like you would with a tired friend. Let it speak without needing to respond. Breathe. Watch it come. Watch it stay. Watch it fade. Thoughts are temporary visitors. If left alone, they always leave. There's also the power of labeling, not in judgment, but in clarity. When a thought appears, you can gently say, thinking. That's all. No story, no identity, just a simple recognition. This creates space between you and the thought. It reminds you that you are the awareness, not the noise. The more you do this, the less grip the thought has. It's like watching a storm from a window instead of standing in the rain. This also means breaking the habit of urgency. Not every thought needs immediate attention. Not every discomfort needs to be fixed tonight. The mind is addicted to urgency because it wants relief. But real relief doesn't come from rushing. It comes from resting. There is a profound peace in saying, I don't need to solve this right now. That simple sentence can deflate hours of mental tension. Sometimes people fear that if they don't solve the thought, it will control them. But the opposite is true. The more you try to fight it, the more it becomes real. But when you allow it to exist without feeding it, it loses its shape. It's like fog. It looks dense from far away, but as you walk into it, it disappears. That's what happens when awareness meets thoughts without fear. And when intrusive thoughts are deeply painful, this practice becomes even more important. Because peace is not avoiding pain, it's sitting with pain without becoming it. The Buddhist path teaches that suffering is optional. Pain will visit, yes, but suffering only happens when we resist, when we fight, when we demand answers that don't exist. But what if you sat with that pain like an old monk sits with his tea, quiet, unhurried, breathing? Peace doesn't require fixing the world inside your head. It requires meeting it with honesty and stillness. It means sitting in the center of the storm and realizing you are not the wind. You are the space it moves through. And in that space, nothing needs to be solved. Everything is already okay. Thoughts will always come back. That's not a failure. That's just the nature of the mind. But every time you meet them with non-interference, every time you choose not to solve, you are rewiring your brain for peace. You are teaching your nervous system that safety does not require certainty. You are whispering to your inner world, you are safe, even now. This is how reprogramming begins, not through force, but through patience, not through figuring it all out, but through letting some things be unknown. Because the truth is, not every mystery needs a resolution. Not every thought is a clue. Sometimes it's just weather, and sometimes the most enlightened response is to watch the clouds and say nothing at all. And so, in this stillness, something else begins to grow. An inner confidence that doesn't rise and fall with thought. A quiet trust in the mind's ability to rest. A deeper knowing that peace is not the absence of thoughts, but the absence of resistance. And this knowing begins to settle in the body like warm light, slowly, naturally, unforced. The thought that didn't need solving is no longer a threat. It's just a ripple on a wide, still lake. And you are not the ripple. You are the lake. Let the mind rest. Let the thought pass. Let peace begin where fixing ends. And now that we've let go of the need to solve every thought, something even quieter begins to surface. When the fixing ends, when the mind no longer rushes to respond or defend, there's a silence that starts to settle in. At first it feels unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable. But stay with it, because this silence carries a secret medicine. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the beginning of healing. Healing from the voice that's been living in your head for years, whispering that you're not good enough. It's time we meet that voice, not with anger, not with resistance, but with a silence so deep it begins to soften everything it touches. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels honest. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply refuses to echo them. And in that refusal, something powerful starts to shift. The voice of the inner critic, sharp, constant, familiar, starts to lose its volume. Not because it's been silenced by force, but because it no longer finds anything to argue with. That's the beauty of awareness wrapped in silence. It doesn't react, so judgment has nothing to hold on to. Most people don't realize how often they speak to themselves with cruelty. The phrases are quiet, but piercing. You should have done better. You're always messing up. What's wrong with you? These aren't thoughts. They're habits. Habits that started from someone else's words, but became the language of your own mind. And the more familiar they get, the more real they seem. But here's the truth. Just because something is loud doesn't mean it's true. The inner critic is not a wise guide. It's an echo of fear pretending to be helpful. Silence, however, speaks in a different way. It doesn't try to convince or correct. It doesn't shout. It just waits. It welcomes without feeding. And in that space, something remarkable begins to happen. The critic keeps talking, but you stop listening. Not from denial, but from understanding. You begin to recognize that this voice is not who you are. It's a pattern. And patterns, no matter how old, can dissolve when they are met with awareness. In Buddhism, this is where deep mindfulness begins to unfold. Not as a tool to escape judgment, but as a space in which judgment loses its power. When you sit in silence long enough, without trying to change the experience, the inner critic starts to get bored. It feeds on your reactions. It needs you to respond, to shrink, to defend. But when you meet it with pure observation, it has nothing left to grip. You become like a mountain, unshaken by the weather passing over it. The reason this is so transformative is because the inner critic thrives on speed. It interrupts, it rushes, it wants answers and apologies before you've even had time to breathe. But silence slows everything down. It stretches space between the voice and the reaction, and in that space you have a choice. Not a dramatic one, not a fight, just a shift, a quiet turning away from harm and toward presence. You don't argue with the critic. You don't try to fix it. You just listen with stillness until it loses its edge. One of the most beautiful things about this process is that it's not loud. It doesn't come with applause or a breakthrough moment. It comes in the form of a breath that doesn't collapse under pressure. A pause where there used to be panic. A moment of peace where there used to be punishment. That's the beginning of freedom. Not the removal of the voice, but the removal of its authority. When you practice sitting in silence with awareness, you begin to discover that underneath all those harsh thoughts is something soft. Not weakness, compassion, not denial, truth. You start to hear another voice, quieter, gentler. It doesn't push you to be more, do more, achieve more. It simply reminds you that you are already enough, not because of what you've done, but because you are here, breathing, aware. Many Buddhist teachings describe this as returning to your original mind, the mind before judgment, before labels, before the layers of comparison and shame were added. And it's not a destination, it's a practice, a quiet, daily return to stillness where your worth is not measured by how much noise you make, but by how deeply you can rest. This kind of silence takes courage. Not everyone is ready to face what surfaces when the noise dies down, but the ones who do discover something rare. The voice that says, "Not enough," begins to dissolve in a space where it's no longer needed. The silence doesn't shout it down. It just absorbs it, like the ocean absorbs a drop of ink, not by pushing it out, but by being infinitely larger. This is what it means to soften the inner critic, not to battle it, but to stop amplifying it, to stop turning it into a judge and start seeing it for what it is, a shadow. And shadows disappear not by being cut, but by being lit from within. There is also wisdom in not replying. The ego wants you to respond, to defend yourself, to prove your worth. But silence teaches a different kind of strength, the kind that knows when to say nothing, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. Some thoughts are not worthy of your energy. Some accusations lose their meaning the moment you refuse to echo them. And here's the part that surprises most people. The more you rest in this silence, the more kindness begins to rise naturally, not forced, not rehearsed. It just appears, like sunlight through an open window. You begin to talk to yourself the way you would speak to a child you love, not to scold or control, but to comfort. It's okay. You're trying. You don't have to be perfect. These aren't affirmations. They're truths you forgot because the noise was too loud. Over time, the voice of the critic may still show up, but now it arrives in a room that doesn't belong to it. It speaks, but the silence doesn't bend. And that silence, that still, soft awareness, is your real nature. It's always been there, but only when you stop listening to the wrong voice does the right one get a chance to speak. In the depths of Buddhist meditation, monks learn to sit with every kind of thought, not to chase enlightenment, not to feel better, but to see clearly, to see that the voice saying, "You are unworthy," is just another wave. That wave rises, and it falls, and it is not you. You are the ocean underneath it all. This is not a practice of perfection. It's a practice of presence. Even when the critic is loud, even when the thoughts sting, you breathe, you stay, you allow, and slowly the voice that once ruled your inner world begins to fade into the background, like an old song you've heard too many times to care about. The silence that softens the inner critic doesn't come from effort. It comes from surrender, from not needing to be better before you are allowed to be kind to yourself, from letting go of the idea that peace is something you earn. Peace is what's left when the judgment goes quiet. And silence is what teaches you that. The path forward is simple. Sit, breathe, listen without agreeing, feel without shrinking, stay without fixing. The more you practice this, the less power the critic has, because power is only ever given. And now You are choosing to stop giving it away. Let this be the new way, not one of correction, but of compassion. Not one of explanation, but of quiet recognition. You don't need to win an argument against your inner critic. You only need to stop feeding it with your attention. The silence will do the rest. And slowly, that silence will become your home. Not because the world is quiet, not because your thoughts have disappeared, but because you have learned how to listen without punishment, how to witness without shame, and how to sit with yourself in a way that says, without words, you are enough. This is the beginning of real peace, and it lives in a silence that knows the truth and no longer needs to prove it. And once the inner critic begins to lose its voice, something unexpected happens. The silence reveals more than just peace. It uncovers something that's been hiding underneath the noise all along, a sense of identity held too tightly, a self constantly shaped by stories that were never questioned. When judgment fades, we don't just find relief, we find space. And in that space, a deeper question arises. Who are you really when the story disappears? There was once a monk who lived in a quiet temple surrounded by wind and pine trees. One day, someone asked his name, and he answered with a soft smile, "I've forgotten." Not because he was confused, not because he didn't care, but because he had spent years letting go of the labels that once defined him, his past, his achievements, his mistakes. He didn't carry his story like a badge anymore. He carried the present moment like a lamp. The idea of forgetting your name may sound strange, even unsettling. But it's not about memory. It's about freedom. Most people live inside a tight identity built from childhood, culture, opinions, and wounds. I am this. I am not that. These become walls, and those walls become the prison where peace can't breathe. The monk who forgot his name was not lost. He had simply stepped out of the story. The human ego survives by holding on to a fixed sense of self. It collects experiences like trophies and traumas, wraps them into a narrative, and says, "This is who I am." But that identity is often a cage. If you believe you are your failures, you suffer when you fall. If you believe you are your success, you panic when it fades. If you believe you are your trauma, you keep reliving it every time the memory stirs. But what if you're none of these? What if peace begins the moment you stop clinging to the story? Buddhist practice teaches that the self is not a solid object. It's a process, a series of changing thoughts, reactions, roles. The name changes, the face changes, the personality, even that shifts. Yet, the one who watches all of it remains, and that watcher is not defined by a past. It's not defined at all. It simply is. The deeper you go into this awareness, the more you see how much energy is wasted defending the story of me. Think about it. How much conflict comes from protecting your identity? You feel insulted when someone questions your intelligence. You feel threatened when your beliefs are challenged. You feel anxious when you're not living up to your idea of who you should be. But all of that tension only exists because of the structure the ego built. And every structure requires maintenance. It needs to be upheld, defended, reaffirmed. It's tiring. That's why so many people feel exhausted, not because of life, but because of the story they have to carry through it. Letting go of personal identity doesn't mean you disappear. It means you stop confusing the mask with the face. You stop mistaking the biography for the being. And in that pause, something opens, a kind of lightness. You don't have to be perfect anymore. You don't have to be consistent. You don't even have to explain yourself. You can just be. And that's where peace begins, not in improvement, but in release. One of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism is anatta, non-self. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you are not what you think you are. You are not the fixed thing your mind imagines. You are not bound by your past, not limited by your labels, not locked into your old roles. Non-self is not nihilism. It's liberation. It's stepping out of the story that says, I am this, and discovering the space where you are free to be anything or nothing at all. And here's the surprising part. When you stop clinging to your identity, your heart opens. Because you're no longer defending a position, you're no longer comparing your worth, you're no longer seeking constant validation. You become easier with yourself, easier with others. You laugh more, you soften more. You begin to see others not as characters in your story, but as mirrors reflecting your own changing nature. This is why the monk who forgot his name was at peace. He didn't need to be someone to feel complete. His being wasn't tied to a history. His worth wasn't tied to a title. He had returned to something even more basic: presence. He had dropped the weight of self-description and found something deeper than any label could offer. Most suffering comes from clinging to opinions, identities, grudges, roles. The mind says, I am the one who was betrayed. And now peace can't enter because the door is guarded by the story. But when you meet that pain without the identity, when you sit with it without attaching a name, you create a space wide enough for healing to enter. You no longer need the pain to mean something. You just let it be. And in that letting, it begins to soften. There is power in knowing that the story of your life is not fixed. It's being written every moment. And if it's being written, then it can also be rewritten or even dropped. Not out of rejection, but out of wisdom. When the story no longer serves peace, you lay it down, and the silence left behind is not empty. It's full of life. This is not easy. The ego will resist. It will say, but who am I without my past? The answer is simple. Free. You are free. Free to grow. Free to change. Free to stop performing for an identity that no longer fits. Most people don't fear the unknown. They fear losing the known. But in spiritual practice, that loss is the doorway. It's not death. It's renewal. Every time you let go of who you think you are, you meet yourself in a new way. You see that peace isn't found in becoming more. It's found in needing less. Less identity, less justification, less proving, more presence, more breath, more being. This is the path the monk walked, not up a mountain, but inward, away from titles, away from labels, into the heart of silence, where no name was needed and no past could hold him down. When you stop identifying with the voice in your head, you begin to hear life directly, not filtered through stories, not distorted by pride or fear, just pure awareness, meeting this moment as it is. And in that meeting, something wakes up, a deeper self, not made of thought, not made of image, just still, open, present. That presence is not a person. It's a space. And that space is your original nature. The one that doesn't need to be introduced. The one that can't be harmed by praise or insult. The one that doesn't rise and fall with fortune. It simply is. Always has been. And when you return to it, the rest begins to fade. So take a breath. Drop the name. Drop the story. Drop the need to be anyone special. And what remains is the peace you were chasing all along. It was never in your identity. It was always in your being. This is how the monk forgot his name. Not as an act of forgetting, but as an act of remembering what came before the name. What came before the identity. What remains when all else falls away. You don't have to abandon your life. You don't have to move to a monastery. You just have to loosen the grip, loosen the labels, let yourself be new again and again. Because that's what you really are. Not a fixed story, but a living silence that never needed a name to be whole. This is where peace begins. Not when you finish the story, but when you no longer need to tell it. And now that the story has been set down, now that the name has been loosened, the ego's grip softened, and the identity gently left behind, what rises next is something even more primal. Feeling. Raw, unfiltered emotion. When there is no longer a character to protect, defend, or perform, emotion becomes pure movement. But for most, emotion isn't met as movement. It's met as weight. And that's where the trouble begins. Not with the feeling itself, but with what's done to it after. Some feelings feel too big, others feel wrong. Anger, grief, fear, guilt, they rise like storms, and before the mind knows what to do, the hands are already building cages. Hold it in, push it down, explain it, judge it. And just like that, emotion becomes something it was never meant to be. A prisoner, a trapped cloud, heavy with rain that no longer falls. But there is another way, a wiser way, a Buddhist way. Let the cloud pass, let the rain fall, let the feeling move. The mind believes that holding emotion is strength, that suppression equals mastery. But suppression isn't strength, it's tension. It's carrying a thunderstorm in your chest and pretending the sky is clear. Real strength is letting the cloud drift through without building a dam, to feel deeply but not drown, to allow but not attach. This is what it means to be the cloud that didn't hold the rain. In Buddhist practice, emotions are not problems. They are energies. They come, they go. They do not belong to the self. They are not signs of weakness or failure. They are the weather of the heart. Anger, when held tightly, becomes poison. But when met without resistance, it rises, peaks, and dissolves. Sadness, when judged, becomes shame. But when met with stillness, it becomes a softening. Anxiety, when fought, becomes panic. But when observed, it becomes breath. The difference isn't in the emotion, it's in how it's held. Most people treat emotions like secrets, something to hide or to control. But in silence, emotions become messengers. They aren't asking to be fixed, they're asking to be felt. Not indulged, not dramatized, just felt, fully, with presence. That's what releases them. Not time, not distraction, but honest attention. The challenge is that feelings, especially painful ones, often carry memories with them, and when they rise, the mind races to create meaning. Why am I angry again? What's wrong with me? Will this sadness ever end? But those questions don't free the feeling. They cage it in narrative, and emotion becomes stuck, not because it's too strong, but because the mind won't stop talking about it. There is power in feeling without the story. The cloud doesn't need to explain the rain, it just releases it. When you practice meditation, especially mindfulness of emotion, you begin to notice that feelings have their own intelligence. They rise on their own. They fade on their own. The only reason they linger is because they are being resisted or possessed. Resistance says, go away. Possession says, stay forever. But awareness says, you're allowed. And in that permission, emotions become light again. They lose their density. They pass. To allow emotion without clinging is not to become passive. It's to become spacious. In that space, something profound is discovered. You are not the emotion. Anger may fill the room, but it is not the room. Sadness may soak the heart, but it is not the heart. You are the sky that holds all weather, untouched by any of it. This truth does not come through thinking. It comes through sitting, through breathing, through not reacting. It comes through watching the wave rise and fall without needing to stop it. This practice requires tenderness, not force. If a child cries, you don't yell at the child to stop. You sit near, you stay present, you let them feel. Your emotions are no different. The ones that scare you the most are often the ones that were never fully heard. They return not to harm you, but to be held, not by your intellect, but by your silence. In Buddhist psychology, there's a teaching called mindfulness of feeling tone. Every sensation carries with it a tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The mistake is thinking that unpleasant means bad, but unpleasant is just a signal, not a sentence. When you feel discomfort, it doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is rising, and if it rises, it can also fall. The cloud that didn't hold the rain is not emotionless. It is honest. It allows without collapsing. It feels without flooding. That's the practice. Letting anger be anger without becoming angry. Letting grief be grief without becoming grief. Letting fear be fear without becoming fear. This is the heart of Buddhist emotional wisdom, not avoidance, not control, but freedom in full presence. Many traditions teach that spiritual growth is about getting rid of emotion. But that's not Buddhism. Buddhism teaches how to meet emotions skillfully, not to erase the weather, but to understand it, to learn that even the heaviest storm can't drown the sky. You are the sky. You are not the storm. And when emotions become intense, so intense that they feel unbearable, remember this: they are temporary, always. Even the worst wave has an end. The key is to stay in the breath, not the thought, not the panic, the breath, because the breath is always here. It's the anchor that reminds you, this too is passing. No matter how strong it feels, it is still a cloud. It is not you. Emotions become dangerous when they are denied. What you don't feel, you store. And what you store begins to leak in your body, your words, your choices. That's why letting the rain fall matters. Not just for peace, but for health. To cry is not weakness. To tremble is not failure. It's release. It's movement. The more you allow, the less you carry. There's also the danger of over-identifying, saying, I am an angry person. I am depressed. I am anxious. These are not truths. They are moments, descriptions of passing states, not permanent selves. Cling to them, and they become armor. Let them pass, and they become sky. When you sit in meditation and a strong emotion rises, try this. Feel it in the body, not the mind. Where is it located? Is it hot? Is it tight? Is it sharp? Stay with the sensation. Breathe into it. Don't describe it. Don't analyze it. Just witness. That's how the energy transforms. Not through logic, through loving attention. And sometimes feelings will return again and again. That's okay. Repetition is not failure. It's depth. Each time the emotion rises, you get another chance to meet it differently. Not as a problem, but as presence. You grow not by never feeling pain, but by never abandoning yourself when the pain comes. This is how you become the cloud that doesn't hold the rain, not by never feeling, but by never clinging, never blocking, never over-defining. You become the one who lets it pass, who trusts the process, who knows that no emotion is final, no feeling is permanent, and no storm lasts forever. And in that trust, a new kind of peace emerges, not cold, not distant, but warm, alive, unshakable. You begin to feel everything without being ruled by anything. That's not detachment, that's mastery. And mastery in Buddhism isn't control, it's harmony with what is. There will always be more clouds, more storms, more feelings. But now, you know something different. You don't have to hold the rain. You don't have to explain the thunder. You don't have to be the weather. You are the one who lets it pass. And in that letting, everything changes. The mind softens. The body relaxes. The breath deepens. The heart opens. And what remains is what was always underneath the storm: stillness. That is the way of the cloud that didn't hold the rain. That is the way of the mind that no longer needs to control emotion to be at peace. Let it fall, let it rise, let it go. And once emotions are no longer held back, once sadness, anger, and fear are allowed to pass like rain that no longer floods the body, something quieter becomes visible beneath it all. The way life itself keeps moving, even when we wish it wouldn't. This movement is not chaotic. It's not random. It's just natural. Just like the wind, the seasons, the breath. But while emotions are usually fought with control, life is resisted with something deeper: fear of change. And where there is fear, there is tension. The next step on this path isn't about feeling, it's about flowing. And this is where we meet the stone that didn't resist the river. There's something sacred about stillness. But stillness isn't the same as stubbornness. What many call peace is often just resistance wearing a calm face. It's the refusal to let go, the inability to accept what shifted, what left, what never became what was hoped for. When people say they want peace, what they often mean is they want things not to change. But peace doesn't come from holding the river still. It comes from learning how not to resist the current. The stone that doesn't resist the river does not lose its strength. It gains wisdom. It learns the shape of the current, not by fighting it, but by surrendering to its rhythm. In the same way, life cannot be controlled into stillness. It can only be moved with presence. When something changes, a job, a relationship, a body, a plan, the mind often tenses up. It reaches for old stories, for the comfort of how things used to be. But comfort isn't the same as truth, and truth always flows. Buddhism teaches impermanence as a central truth. Everything changes. No feeling lasts. No situation stays fixed. Even joy fades. Even sorrow passes. Yet the human mind, afraid of loss, pretends it doesn't. It clings to what's already dissolving. And in that clinging, it suffers. The suffering doesn't come from the change itself. It comes from resistance to it. Letting go isn't about becoming passive. It's about becoming wise. It's understanding that the river doesn't ask for permission to flow. It simply moves. And the more you brace against it, the more exhausted you become. But when you soften into its direction, something shifts inside. You stop being dragged by change. You begin to ride with it. This is not easy, especially when what's changing is precious, especially when what's lost feels like part of who you are. But the stone that didn't resist the river didn't give up its dignity. It gained a smoother surface. It was shaped into something more graceful. And this is what happens to the human spirit in the flow of life, not weakened, refined. Many people fear acceptance because they think it means approval. But to accept something doesn't mean you liked it. It means you've stopped arguing with the fact that it happened. You're no longer caught in the loop of, it shouldn't be this way, because it already is. And fighting what already is, that's where suffering breeds. Disappointment is a part of the flow. Not because life is cruel, but because expectations are often built on stories that can't hold water. You plan for something, you try hard, you dream, and then the path bends, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply, but always away from control. And if the heart can soften in that moment, if it can say, even this is allowed, then the current becomes a teacher instead of a threat. Softening isn't weakness. It's intelligent surrender. It's knowing when to release the grip that's hurting you. It's knowing when to stop rehearsing an outcome that never came true. It's knowing how to sit with change without needing to call it good or bad, just letting it be what it is, new, different, alive. The river doesn't stop for anyone's plans, but it doesn't have to be an enemy. It can become the guide, the one that carries you forward when you're tired, the one that shows you shores you didn't know existed, but only if you stop trying to anchor yourself in places that were meant to pass. One of the most painful things to release is a version of life you built in your head, the relationship you thought would last, the version of yourself you thought you'd be, the timeline you thought was yours. But those are not failures. They are bends in the river, and the river doesn't apologize for bending. It just bends and keeps moving. Buddhist practice helps train the mind to watch without gripping, to see the thought that says, I didn't want this, and not merge with it, to feel the pain of change without drowning in it, to witness the flow and breathe, even when the current is unfamiliar. Meditation becomes the stone's quiet answer to the rushing water. It teaches the body to stop tensing every time something shifts. It teaches the breath to stay long, even when the ground moves. And eventually, it teaches the heart to trust that just because something ends doesn't mean it was meaningless. It simply means its time came. The habit of resisting life shows up everywhere, in the way people hold on to old arguments, in the way grief becomes an identity, in the way the mind says, "It shouldn't have happened this way," over and over. But no amount of mental repetition will undo reality. Only presence will make it bearable. Only acceptance will make it soft. There's a phrase in Zen that says, "Let go or be dragged." The choice isn't between pain and no pain. It's between clean pain and tangled suffering. Clean pain is loss. Tangled suffering is the refusal to let go of the story around that loss. It's not the grief itself, it's the sentence, "I should not have to feel this," but you do. And if you let yourself feel it fully, it passes faster than resistance ever could allow. Change is the nature of the universe. Even the cells in your body are shifting as you read this. Even the sky above you is in motion. Peace, then, is not about finding something fixed. It's about finding a deeper stillness within the movement. It's about being like the stone, not pushing back, not needing to win, but resting within the flow as it moves over you. The deeper this practice goes, the less afraid you become of losing things. Not because loss stops hurting, but because you understand that nothing truly belongs to you. Not even your roles, not even your name, not even your plans. Life is on loan. Every breath is borrowed. And when you stop clutching what you cannot keep, you start cherishing it more deeply. To be at peace with impermanence is to be at peace with life. Not just the good parts, all of it. The endings, the beginnings, the transitions, the days that don't go as expected, the dreams that didn't unfold, the moments that surprised you with beauty and the ones that broke you open. All of it is the river, and the river is always honest. The stone that didn't resist the river wasn't a philosopher. It didn't have theories, it simply let go. It trusted the ground underneath, even when it moved. It stayed still, not because it was frozen, but because it had stopped arguing with the water. That's the teaching. To be still, not out of force, but out of trust. This trust doesn't come overnight. It comes slowly, from sitting with small disappointments and learning not to make them enemies, from breathing through uncertainty without rushing to conclusions, from saying yes to the moment, even when it hurts. Not yes to liking it, but yes to allowing it. The more you allow, the more you align with life, with truth, with the natural rhythm that flows through everything. And the less you demand the world to match your plans, the more room you have to notice the beauty in what's actually unfolding. You don't need to like every twist. You don't need to celebrate every loss. But you do need to meet them with honesty. Because honesty is where the heart stops resisting. And a heart that no longer resists is a heart that can finally rest. This is how the stone becomes wise, not by studying, not by memorizing teachings, but by letting go again and again, until nothing inside tightens when life changes, until disappointment no longer turns to despair, until change no longer feels like threat, but as a gentle reminder, nothing stays. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's life. And once resistance fades, once the body no longer tenses against change, once the heart no longer argues with impermanence, what's left is something surprisingly steady. The quiet space to care. Not because everything is calm, not because people are easy, but because the heart is no longer spending all its energy fighting life. And this is where the next lesson reveals itself. Not about letting go, but about staying lit. Because what good is peace if it flickers in the face of challenge? What good is compassion if it burns out at the first storm? Here we meet the candle that didn't burn out. There is a kind of light that doesn't flicker in the wind, a warmth that doesn't collapse from overuse. True compassion is not fragile. It does not weaken from being extended. But many people confuse compassion with depletion. They think caring means constantly giving themselves away. They think kindness must come at the cost of their own well-being. But real compassion is not self-sacrifice. It is self-awareness wrapped in empathy. When the heart gives without boundaries, it burns too fast. When the mind absorbs everyone else's pain without returning to its own center, it becomes foggy, tense, overwhelmed. And in that exhaustion, something precious gets lost, the ability to stay soft. The candle that didn't burn out wasn't protected by a glass dome. It simply learned to burn in a way that didn't fight the air around it. That's what sustainable compassion looks like. Buddhist teachings often return to the image of loving kindness, or metta, as a practice that begins inward and flows outward. Not because others are less important, but because, without an anchored self, compassion becomes performative. It starts to seek approval. It turns into obligation. And that's where burnout hides, in giving to be accepted, to feel worthy, to avoid conflict. But real compassion is quiet. It gives without asking for return. And it knows how to pause without guilt. To remain lit in the face of difficulty means first knowing the difference between compassion and emotional entanglement. Compassion sees suffering and responds with care. Entanglement absorbs suffering and responds with identity. This is now my pain too, but that isn't helpful. It doesn't free the other person, it only spreads the fire. The candle that lasts is the one that knows how to witness pain without becoming it. This doesn't mean distance, it means clarity. A compassionate mind doesn't rush in to fix everything. It doesn't scramble to please. It stays present. It listens. It offers warmth, not heat, support, not control. In Buddhist psychology, this is known as the near enemy of compassion, pity or overwhelm disguised as care. Real compassion is not a flood, it's a steady stream. It gives and it rests, it touches and it releases. And this is especially important in dealing with difficult people. Those who test your patience, who lash out, who drain energy without knowing it. The instinct might be to withdraw completely or to overextend in order to keep peace. But both are imbalances. The middle way is learning how to show up with kindness without losing your center. That's the practice, to stay open without leaking. This kind of compassion begins in the body. Tension is the first sign that care is turning into stress. When your shoulders rise, when the breath shortens, when the jaw tightens, these are signals. Not that you're failing, but that you're reaching too far, that you're pouring from a cup that's already empty. Buddhist monks are taught not just how to give, but how to return, how to come back to the breath, to the present, to the seat of awareness that doesn't need to prove kindness. Many people were taught that love means exhaustion, that if they're not tired, they're not trying hard enough. But compassion does not demand burnout. It demands presence. And presence can be powerful without being loud. You can offer calm in chaos, not by fixing others, but by refusing to abandon yourself. The candle that doesn't burn out doesn't hide from the wind. It burns with balance. Balance is the key. It means taking moments to nourish yourself without labeling it selfish. It means setting boundaries without guilt. It means recognizing when you're beginning to give from fear instead of peace. This is not rejection. It's refinement. The more refined your compassion, the more it glows without smoke. The more it touches without controlling, the more it rests without hardening. There's also wisdom in understanding that compassion doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it's not saying yes. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's silence instead of rescue. True compassion doesn't serve ego, it serves truth. And sometimes truth says, I care about you, but I will not carry what is yours to hold. In moments of personal struggle, the same applies inward. The mind can be unkind. It can criticize your limits, your fatigue, your boundaries. But sustainable compassion includes yourself, not as an afterthought, but as a beginning. You cannot pour from an empty vessel, and you don't have to be empty to be worthy. In meditation practice, one of the foundational exercises is to repeat phrases of loving kindness to oneself. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be at ease. This is not indulgence. It is recalibration. Every time you repeat it, the flame steadies, the mind softens, the nervous system remembers. Kindness is allowed here too. This inner grounding is what allows you to show up when the outer world becomes hard. Not because you've armored yourself, but because you've rooted yourself. The candle cannot protect its flame by closing off the air. It protects it by finding the right distance between fuel and spark, between breath and burn. This is the wisdom of a sustainable heart. Sometimes the hardest person to extend compassion to is someone who has hurt you. The mind wants justice. The body remembers the wound. But even then, compassion doesn't mean excusing. It means releasing. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Anger that is held becomes heaviness, but compassion, even if quiet and small, lightens the load. It doesn't deny pain, it just refuses to carry it any longer than necessary. And compassion isn't only needed in great moments of suffering. It's needed in the small, daily moments when someone forgets to say, thank you. When you're misunderstood. When you make a mistake and the critic rises again. These are the sparks that can either light fires or be met with soft breath. The mind trained in kindness knows how to pause, to choose warmth over reaction, not because it's weak, but because it's free. The candle that doesn't burn out doesn't do so by chance. It burns with wisdom. It gives without being consumed. And most of all, it returns to stillness before the wick runs too low. This is the rhythm of a peaceful life. Compassion out, breath in. Light shared, silence restored. This rhythm isn't taught in books. It's learned through experience, through noticing when giving becomes straining, through forgiving yourself for not always having energy, through trusting that even in rest, your presence is still a gift. And slowly, you realize something profound. Your kindness doesn't have to be perfect. Your compassion doesn't need to be endless. What matters is that it's sincere, that it comes from a place of clarity, not compulsion, that it's chosen, not forced. This is how light stays lit. This is how the heart remains whole. You begin to see that the world doesn't need more people who give until they disappear. It needs more people who know how to shine steadily, kindly, gently, who know how to say, "Yes, I care," without saying, "So I will break for you." This is how the candle becomes a guide, not just for others, but for the one holding it. And as the practice deepens, a quiet strength grows. The kind that doesn't collapse in crisis. The kind that doesn't burn out in noise. The kind that knows when to sit, when to speak, when to rest. This strength doesn't need applause. It only needs truth. You have that strength, not by doing more, but by remembering how to return to stillness, to breath, to kindness without cost. That is how compassion becomes your nature, not your burden. That is how your light stays lit, even in the wind. And once the flame is protected, once compassion is offered without depletion, once presence is no longer confused with overextension, something even quieter begins to show itself. A question forms, almost silently. If I no longer need to fix everything, if I no longer need to carry everyone, what now fills the space where striving used to live? What becomes of the self that no longer burns to prove its worth? Here, in this stillness, enters the bowl that was empty but complete. There's a kind of peace that isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or recognition. It arrives in the gentle silence that settles when you stop chasing what you thought you needed to be whole. Most people don't realize how much of their suffering comes from the idea that something is still missing. That one more achievement, one more possession, one more compliment will finally make them feel enough. But the truth is, the search for more often distracts from the wholeness that's already here. The bowl is empty, but it is not lacking. Its emptiness is what makes it useful. Without the hunger to be filled, there's room for peace to settle. This is the wisdom that non-attainment teaches. Not that goals are wrong, not that dreams should be erased, but that fulfillment does not wait at the end of effort. It exists quietly beneath the effort, under the grasping, beneath the pressure to become. In Buddhist practice, this is the art of contentment, not complacency, not giving up, but the understanding that presence is enough, that being here fully, quietly, without trying to improve the moment, is the deepest form of arrival. The bowl that is full cannot receive anything more. The bowl that is empty is ready, not greedy, just open. The world teaches accumulation. Gather more, know more, own more. And so the mind becomes a collector of titles, experiences, roles. It fills itself with opinions and urgency, always looking ahead. But what it often forgets is that peace doesn't come from what's added. It comes from what's released. Not a gain, but a loosening. Not an increase, but a letting go. An empty bowl does not need to be explained. It just is. Its silence is not a problem. It's a resting place. The same is true for the human spirit. When stripped of constant pursuit, when freed from the obsession with having or becoming, it doesn't become hollow. It becomes spacious. That space is not emptiness in the painful sense. It's the fertile space where calm grows. This is not to say that desires are wrong. Desire is part of being alive. But it's the attachment to desire, the belief that happiness is somewhere out there, in something that must be gained, that becomes the trap. When the mind is always chasing, it never sees where it is, and what it chases keeps moving just out of reach. But the bowl does not chase. It waits, and in its waiting, it receives everything. The peace of non-attainment is radical, because it breaks the illusion that you are one step away from enoughness. It says, you are already enough, not someday, now, not if, not when, now. But that's hard for the ego to hear. The ego is built on stories of incompleteness. It thrives on striving. It wants identity through effort. But awareness has no such hunger. Awareness is content with being aware. This is why meditation is not about becoming something. It's about undoing. Each breath softens the need to be somewhere else. Each moment on the cushion becomes a reminder, this is enough. You sitting, you breathing, you present. No need to add meaning, no need to subtract discomfort. Just being, just the bowl, empty of craving, full of presence. In everyday life, this lesson changes how we move, how we speak, how we relate. We stop performing, we stop reaching for validation. We listen more, we speak with less urgency, we eat with more care, we walk slower. We realize we don't need to win every conversation. We don't need to prove our value in every room. The bowl doesn't shout to be seen. It holds space quietly, and yet it is always ready. Non-attainment doesn't mean detachment from life. It means deeper intimacy with it. When you're not trying to turn the moment into something else, you can actually experience it. Taste the tea, hear the wind, feel the weight of your body in the chair. These are not obstacles to meaning, these are meaning, the richness that striving overlooks. This way of being softens relationships too. When you're not trying to extract something from people, a reaction, approval, admiration, you begin to truly see them, not as tools, not as mirrors, but as fellow bowls, whole, present, flawed, human. And from that recognition, real connection is born. Not connection based on transaction, but on shared stillness. The bowl that was empty but complete doesn't need to earn its worth. It knows its worth is not in what it holds, but in its ability to hold. That same wisdom lives inside the body. The worth is not in the doing, it's in the being, in the capacity to witness, to breathe, to stay with life without trying to edit it. This doesn't mean ambition is wrong. It means ambition is best held loosely. When goals come from inspiration rather than insecurity, they enrich life. But when they come from a place of lack, they trap the heart. They make every moment into a waiting room for the future. But the future never arrives as imagined. It's always just now, dressed in different clothing. The bowl doesn't wait for tomorrow to be valuable. It already is. This practice of non-attainment is subtle. It often doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like a breath, like a quiet moment when nothing is wrong and nothing needs to be better. That moment often passes quickly, unnoticed. But it is the doorway to liberation. The more you recognize it, the more it expands, until even in difficulty, there's space. Even in discomfort, there's peace. This is the peace that lives beneath problems. Not because problems are solved, but because the need to resist them is released. It's a shift from needing to control to being able to hold. From fixing to witnessing. From achieving to receiving. The bowl teaches that enoughness is not a conclusion you reach through effort. It is a reality you remember when striving falls away. And remembering doesn't require intensity, just stillness, just honesty, just the willingness to pause long enough to notice what hasn't changed through all the seeking. You've always been here, before the ambition, before the titles, before the disappointments. The awareness that sees, that breathes, that loves, that has never been lacking. It only got covered up by the noise of pursuit. But now, in the quiet, it returns, whole, silent, steady. And in this return, something begins to shift even deeper. A sense that not only is there nothing to attain, but also that everything you were looking for already lives inside the stillness. Peace was not hiding. It was just quiet, waiting for the chase to end. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Not to add more, but to uncover what was always there. Like brushing the dust off a mirror, like finding that the bowl, though empty, has never stopped being full. Of presence, of space, of potential, of life. And as the mind softens its grip, the heart expands. No longer chasing, it begins to receive. No longer proving, it begins to rest. This is not giving up. This is waking up. To what is. To what has always been enough. And now that the bowl has shown us the beauty of space, that wholeness is not something gained, but something remembered in stillness. There is one more layer, waiting quietly beneath that silence. A vibration, a resonance, something ancient that lives not in words, but in tone. Because when the mind becomes still enough to stop striving, it begins to hear the inner bell, not in the ears, but in the chest. A sound that doesn't beg for attention, yet somehow calls the whole body into peace. It's time now to explore the bell that rang in the heart. There is a sound that doesn't ask to be heard, it asks to be felt. It carries no opinion, no argument, no pressure. It's simply there, vibrating quietly at the edge of awareness. In Buddhist practice, this sound is often introduced through mantra or through instruments like singing bowls, gongs, or softly spoken sacred syllables. These are not decorations, they are tools. They speak directly to the nervous system, to the part of us that holds tension long after the stress has passed, to the places in the body that thinking cannot reach. We live in a world of noise. But not all noise is sound. Most of it is mental. Internal tension built from thoughts that don't know how to rest, ideas that repeat, emotions that loop, identities that replay the same roles again and again. This noise lives in the body as tightness, in the neck, the shoulders, the stomach, the chest. Most people carry this without even knowing it, like a hum they've forgotten how to turn off. Sound-based meditation is not just for relaxation, it's for reprogramming that hum, turning the noise into a signal. The bell that rang in the heart is not a literal bell. It's a symbol for the resonance that happens when body and mind are invited into unity. When sound becomes not just something heard, but something experienced, something that reminds the system how to rest, not by suppressing the noise, but by tuning it. Mantra meditation works by repetition, not to numb, but to realign. A simple sound, repeated gently, allows the mind to settle into rhythm, and rhythm is healing. The body craves rhythm. The heart beats. The breath flows. The nervous system regulates through pattern. But when the mind becomes chaotic, the pattern breaks. Mantra restores that order, not through force, but through consistency. You don't need to understand a mantra for it to work. The power is not in the meaning, it's in the vibration. The sound becomes an anchor, pulling awareness out of thought and into presence. Each repetition loosens the grip of overthinking. Each syllable softens the tension held in the chest. It doesn't matter whether it's ancient Sanskrit or a simple hum. What matters is sincerity. What matters is repetition. What matters is listening, not just to the sound, but to what changes inside when you let the sound carry you. The bell does not ask you to figure anything out. It asks you to let go. It doesn't care what kind of day you've had. It simply rings. And in its ringing, something in you resonates. The practice becomes a bridge from chaos to calm, from head to heart, from thought to vibration. And in that crossing, the nervous system learns that it's safe to soften. This is not about chanting loudly or performing rituals. This is about connection. Connection to something deeper than language. A space where sound becomes medicine. Because the truth is, trauma is often stored in silence, not peaceful silence, frozen silence. The kind that holds its breath, but sound melts that ice. It doesn't dig through stories. It doesn't need to name what hurt. It just moves through the cells, through the chest, through the breath, until something inside says, yes, this feels like home. In monasteries across the world, you'll find bells hanging in courtyards. They are not decorations. They are reminders. Every time the bell rings, monks pause, breathe, return to presence. Even one breath, connected to sound, can shift the entire nervous system, from fight or flight into rest and repair. That's the power of sound. It bypasses thought. It speaks the language of the body. And you don't need a temple to find this bell. You only need attention. Even a soft hum repeated gently can become your bell. A whisper of so on the inhale and hum on the exhale. A single syllable repeated like a lullaby to your own nervous system. It doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be true. The heart does not require volume to open. It only requires rhythm. Many people struggle with silent meditation because their mind is too loud. Sound gives it something to hold, something to steady itself against. Like a raft in rough water. You don't try to stop the water, you hold the raft. The mantra is that raft. The bell is that anchor. And over time, something begins to change. The body remembers how to relax. Not in sleep, in wakefulness. The jaw softens, the breath slows. The thoughts still come, but they no longer lead. The sound leads. And eventually, the silence behind the sound, reveals itself. Not the silence of absence, the silence of presence, the one that doesn't need answers to feel whole. This kind of meditation reprograms more than just the mind. It reprograms reactivity. You begin to respond differently to stress, not because life has changed, but because your resonance has. The body, tuned through sound, doesn't react with urgency. It listens, it waits, it responds from the heart. And that's the real bell, the one that rings not through air, but through presence, a bell that no one hears, but everyone feels. When someone speaks to you with that kind of presence, something inside you softens. That's resonance, that's healing, and you can become that bell for others, not by saying anything, but by being aligned. A nervous system that no longer vibrates with fear, but with calm. Buddhist monks often chant in groups, not just for prayer, but for harmony. The shared sound aligns their breath, their intention, their presence. It creates coherence, and coherence is contagious. When you walk into a room carrying inner stillness, it spreads, not through words, through frequency, through how you breathe, through how you look, through how you listen. This is why the bell that rang in the heart is not a practice you do and forget. It's a way of being, a way of staying attuned to yourself, even in noise, a way of returning to rhythm when life pulls you out of it. The sound becomes part of your memory, not just in the mind, in the tissue, in the breath, in the spaces between your thoughts. And when difficult moments arise, and they will, this sound remains. It becomes a refuge, a breath you can repeat, a word that steadies the pulse, a presence that knows how to stay even when everything else moves. The bell never asks you to be perfect. It only asks you to return, again and again, to presence, to breath, to sound, to heart. And this return becomes a rewiring. A nervous system that once lived on edge begins to settle. The mind that once rushed begins to listen. The body that once braced begins to soften. This is not mystical. It's biological. The body heals when it feels safe. And sound is safety encoded. So, whether you chant or hum or listen to the wind, whether you hear it in a bowl or a breath or the rhythm of your steps, let the bell ring, not in the temple, but in you. And once the bell has rung, once the nervous system has remembered how to rest in rhythm, once sound has opened the door to inner stillness, what remains is the breath itself. Not a technique, not a symbol, but the most ancient and personal rhythm of all. Yet even here, there is a deeper truth waiting just beneath awareness. A truth so simple, it's often missed. The breath does not belong to anyone. It flows, not from self, but through self. And when this is seen clearly, something profound dissolves, the illusion that we are separate. Now we enter the breath that didn't belong to anyone. There's a moment in stillness when the breath continues, even though no one is trying to breathe. The chest rises, the air moves, the body expands and releases, and nothing was done to make it happen. That is the moment where identity begins to loosen. The mind may say, "I am breathing," but the body reveals the truth. It is being breathed. Life is moving through, without permission, without control, without ownership. Most of the time, People live as if they are the source of everything, their thoughts, their actions, their breath. But this is only the view from the ego. The view from awareness is different. It sees that everything is borrowed, even the air, even the heartbeat, even consciousness itself. None of it is permanent. None of it is private. It all comes from a source that has no face, no name, no boundaries. The breath is the easiest place to start seeing this, because it is always here. And yet, it is never truly yours. When the mind stops claiming it, the breath becomes a teacher. It shows how to live without grasping, how to soften without retreating, how to let something come and go without calling it mine. In Buddhist meditation, the breath is not just an object of focus. It is a doorway into non-self, a mirror that reflects the truth of impermanence and non-ownership. Each inhale begins on its own. Each exhale leaves without being held. And this happens thousands of times a day, with or without attention, with or without control. That is not a failure of the will. That is grace. When the breath is no longer seen as property, the self begins to loosen. The boundaries that feel so solid, this is me, this is mine, begin to dissolve. The breath moves through the body the same way wind moves through branches. Does the tree own the wind? Does the sky claim the cloud? Of course not. The same is true here. This body, this breath, this awareness, they are all phenomena flowing together, not a person holding on to them. This doesn't mean the body isn't real. It means it's not separate. It means it doesn't operate in isolation. The air you're breathing now was exhaled by someone else, a tree, a stranger, a storm on the other side of the planet, and the breath you release will become someone else's inhale. That's not philosophy, that's biology, and it's also sacred. This kind of insight doesn't have to be abstract. It becomes clear in practice. Sit, breathe, watch the inhale arrive without forcing it. Watch the exhale leave without chasing it. After a while, something shifts. The idea of my breath begins to feel unnatural. The body becomes a vessel, the breath becomes a visitor, and the mind becomes a witness. This witnessing is not passive. It is alive. It sees that the breath does not begin in the lungs. It begins before thought, before intention, before the need to claim anything. It is life moving. And this movement reveals the truth of emptiness, not nothingness, but the absence of solid boundaries, the absence of ownership, the absence of control. To breathe without possession is to experience freedom without effort. It's not about detaching from life. It's about recognizing that life never needed to be gripped in the first place. Control is the habit of the frightened mind, but the breath teaches trust. Every inhale arrives, every exhale returns. No scheduling, no pushing, just flow. And this flow can be felt even in chaos. Even when the world outside feels unstable, the breath remains. It doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't care about opinion. It simply continues. The mind may race, the emotions may surge, but the breath keeps flowing, a quiet, faithful companion, a reminder that life doesn't need to be owned to be trusted. In Buddhist traditions, the breath is also seen as a thread connecting all beings. Not metaphorically, but literally. Everyone breathes. Everyone receives. Everyone gives. There is no breath that does not touch the world. And when the ego falls silent long enough to notice this, compassion arises naturally, not as a moral duty, as recognition. This breath I call mine was never mine. It was always shared. This realization softens many of the tensions that drive human suffering. Jealousy, pride, fear, all are rooted in the belief that the self must protect, must prove, must compete. But when breath is seen clearly, those fears begin to dissolve. You are not in a race. You are in a rhythm, not separate, not alone, not lacking. And this rhythm, once felt, begins to reprogram the nervous system, not with slogans or affirmations, with truth. The body remembers how to let go. The mind begins to understand that safety is not in control, but in connection. The breath teaches this, breath by breath, until the message is no longer just understood. It is lived. Living from this place changes how we interact. You no longer need to dominate conversations. You no longer need to be right. You no longer need to hold your breath during hard moments. You breathe through them. You allow. You soften. And in doing so, you offer permission to others to do the same. Even the idea of forgiveness shifts in this space. When the breath is no longer personal, neither is pain. Offense is no longer taken so deeply. The walls of identity no longer feel so rigid. There is room for others to be human, to be mistaken, to be changing, just like you. And when challenges rise within, grief, anxiety, confusion, the breath remains the path home. Not as an escape, but as an anchor. A way to stay rooted without being trapped. A way to move through intensity without losing yourself in it. Because the self is no longer a small container, it is spacious, porous, capable of holding more than before. This spaciousness is not detachment. It is intimacy with all of life. You begin to see the breath in everything, in the rustling leaves, in the waves, in the quiet exhale of the night. Everything is breathing. Everything is participating in the same dance. And there is no central figure, just movement, just flow. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of anatta, non-self. It is not a void. It is a liberation, a release from the false burden of having to be a fixed someone all the time. The breath shows the way, not by explanation, but by rhythm, by surrender, by presence. So sit with it, not to control it, not to label it, just to feel it move. And the more you feel, the more you understand that what you've been searching for was never missing. It was always here, breathing through you. Not yours, not anyone's, just life, given and received in every moment. And once the breath is no longer claimed, once it's seen as a passing gift rather than a possession, the mind begins to loosen its grip on everything else too. Control fades, urgency quiets. And in that gentleness, something rare is finally allowed to happen. Closure without collapse. Because when you no longer cling to the breath, you no longer need to cling to the moment either. And this is where the next lesson begins, not in holding on, but in the wisdom of letting go, where the door closes softly and peace walks through instead of pain. There is a kind of ending that doesn't slam, doesn't echo, doesn't leave broken pieces behind. It simply completes. like a candle that burns down to the base of the wick, like a wave that reaches the shore and returns without regret. The door that closes gently is not a door of loss. It is a door of grace. And yet, most people are afraid of it, not because the closing is painful, but because they were never taught how to recognize peace dressed as an ending. In daily life, endings are often seen as failures. A relationship ends, and it's labeled a mistake. A job concludes, and it's seen as defeat. A chapter closes, and the mind calls it unfinished. But not all closure is tragedy. Some closure is mercy. Some closure is liberation. And some closure is not even the end of anything, but the natural pause that makes the next note possible. This understanding doesn't come from logic. It comes from presence, from witnessing the ways life moves, how it arrives, stays, fades, how people come and go, how plans rise and fall. And when the mind stops fighting that rhythm, something softer emerges, not resignation, not bitterness, but trust, a quiet inner bow that says, this too is part of the way. In Buddhism, impermanence is not just a concept, it's the doorway to wisdom. When you accept that nothing stays, you also begin to accept that some things are meant to leave, that some doors are not meant to stay open forever, that some chapters are complete even if they ended in a whisper. The suffering doesn't come from the closing, it comes from clinging to the idea that it should have stayed open. This clinging often shows up in subtle ways. The conversation you keep replaying, the person you keep trying to understand, the dream you can't let go of, even though it no longer fits who you've become. But life does not rewind, it flows forward, and the only way to meet it fully is to allow it to change shape. When a door closes gently, it leaves the air still. There's no blame, no war, no storm of explanation, just a knowing. The kind of knowing that arises when you've given what you could, received what was meant, and can now step back without collapsing. That's not giving up. That's maturity. That's love without chains. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is not fight to stay, not force the story to continue, not chase closure like a prize, but to stand quietly in the doorway, breathe, and walk away with dignity. Not because it didn't matter, but because you no longer need it to last in order for it to have mattered. Peace is not always found in resolution. Sometimes it's found in release, in leaving the last word unsaid, in letting the email go unanswered, in deleting the number, not out of anger, but because you've stopped needing the call. This is not coldness, it's clarity. When a door no longer opens to something that serves your becoming, it is okay, more than okay, to let it close. Closure does not need to be dramatic. It does not need to be mutual. It does not need to come with permission. Sometimes it arrives silently, like the moment you stop checking your phone, the moment your heart no longer aches for the explanation, the moment your body exhales because it no longer has to perform hope. That is the door. And that is the grace of walking away gently. This isn't just about people or relationships. It's about roles, identities, versions of yourself that no longer feel true. The achiever who used to measure life in productivity. The caretaker who always said yes. The perfectionist who lived by rules no one else could see. These selves once had a purpose. But if they've become heavy, the door is calling, and you can walk through it with love, not regret. There's wisdom in endings, not the kind that seeks revenge, the kind that understands timing, that knows when the lesson is complete, that doesn't need to burn the past to feel free from it. The fire that heals is not destruction, it's warmth. A warmth that comes from within, when you no longer force yourself to stay in places where peace can't grow. In Buddhist stories, many of the most powerful shifts happen in silence, not with grand decisions, but with small turnings of the heart. A monk laying down his robe, a teacher ending his last sentence and bowing, a student realizing that the question has dissolved and there's no longer any need to speak. These are closures, not loud, but transformative. The mind often searches for signs. Was this the right time? Was it too soon? Did I try hard enough? But life doesn't give answers in neat packages. It gives feelings, it gives signals in the body. The tiredness that doesn't go away, the breath that feels heavier around certain people, the joy that returns when you step away. These are not small things. They are guidance. They are gentle nudges toward the door. And it takes courage to listen, especially when the world tells you to push through, to keep trying, to never quit. But what if the real strength is in knowing when enough has been said, when the page is ready to be turned, when the space that's waiting beyond the door holds something quieter, truer, lighter? Not all peace is found in staying. Some is found in leaving gently, without needing to be understood, without needing to be right, without needing to prove you've healed. The moment you stop needing closure to be dramatic is the moment you begin to experience closure that actually brings peace. This gentleness does not erase the grief. It holds it with care. It says, "This mattered, and now it's over." Not with bitterness, with reverence, because something can be sacred and still be finished. Something can shape you and still be released. This is the softness of the door that closes without slamming, the silence that honors what was and no longer forces what isn't. Even the breath teaches this. Each exhale is a letting go. It does not cling to the air it once held. It releases fully, naturally, trusting that another inhale will come, that there is something next, even if it's not known yet. That's the faith of the door, the faith that what ends makes space for something new. And often the new isn't immediate. It arrives in whispers, in quiet mornings that don't feel so heavy, in laughter that doesn't carry the weight of proving, in stillness that no longer feels empty, but whole. The space beyond the door is not a void. It's a return to yourself, to your rhythm, to peace that no longer needs permission to exist. So if you feel the door, let it close gently. Don't rush it. Don't force it. Just let it rest on its hinges. Let the chapter finish without dragging the ink. Let your feet move, even if you don't yet know where they're going. The softness you walk with now will shape everything that comes next. And once the door has closed gently, once the heart no longer lingers in rooms it has outgrown, once peace is no longer held hostage by unfinished stories, something subtle but extraordinary begins to happen. The footsteps behind you begin to fade, not because they never mattered, but because they are no longer needed to define where you are going. The past stops echoing with urgency. It becomes quiet. And this is where a deeper peace begins to rise, not from what was walked, but from what no longer has to be carried. Now we walk the path that disappeared behind you. There is a kind of freedom that does not announce itself. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand revelations. It arrives quietly when you stop turning around, when you stop looking back to measure your progress, when you stop trying to remember exactly how you got here. It comes when the mind no longer needs a trail to feel safe. The path that disappears behind you is not a loss. It is a return to presence, to what is here now, untracked and unburdened. Most of the time, we walk forward while still facing backwards, trying to make sense of the steps already taken, replaying moments, rebuilding timelines, wondering what could have been different. But peace does not wait for conclusions. It waits for permission. And it arrives the moment you stop assigning meaning to everything that came before and start allowing the moment to stand on its own. The mind holds on to the past as if it were a map. But maps are only useful when you're trying to find a way back. When you're here, already arrived, the map becomes unnecessary weight. And yet, so many people carry it everywhere, not because they need it, but because they don't yet trust what happens when it's set down. But the truth is, you do not need to keep track of where you've been in order to know who you are. The present moment is not a continuation, it's an opening. Buddhist teachings often speak of non-attachment, not only to people or things, but to memory, not as a denial of the past, but as a freedom from being owned by it. Because the past is not static. It changes every time you remember it. It shifts with your mood, your narrative, your identity. And when you realize that, you begin to see that what you're holding on to isn't what happened. It's what the mind keeps making of it. To walk forward without tracking means letting memory lose its sharp edges. It means no longer needing to extract meaning from every moment. It means allowing yesterday to blur without guilt. The ego may protest. It wants a story. It wants cause and effect. It wants to know why. But the heart doesn't need answers. It needs peace. And peace begins when you stop explaining yourself to your own history. This is not amnesia. It's spaciousness. It's what happens when you stop revisiting every turn in the path and begin to trust the steps you're taking now. Because every time you turn around to analyze the past, you're leaving the present unattended. And the present, quiet, alive, honest, is where healing actually lives. The nervous system also benefits from this release. Constant rumination sends signals of danger. The body doesn't know the memory is old. It reacts as if the event is still happening. But when you stop revisiting, the body exhales. It begins to learn that the storm has passed, that the threat is no longer here, that the path behind has already faded, and the one in front is open and safe. And this, too, is practice. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day having forgotten all the pain, but you do start noticing the quiet, the way the memory visits less often, the way your body doesn't tense at the mention of a name, the way your thoughts begin to revolve around what's next, not what already fell away. This release is not erasure, it is transformation. You are not discarding the past, you are integrating it. letting it dissolve into the soil you now stand on, rather than dragging it like a shadow. The self that needed to keep track is softening. You no longer need to keep score, to keep proving, to keep stitching the story together. The present writes its own pages now. One of the gentlest forms of self-compassion is letting the past become quiet. Not defending your choices, not punishing yourself for not knowing then what you know now. Just meeting yourself here, where life is actually happening, where breath is fresh, where nothing is being measured. Just lived. You also begin to notice how often people try to hold you to your old path. They remember who you were. They speak to the version of you that no longer fits. And the temptation is to correct them, to remind them, to explain how much you've changed. But even that becomes unnecessary. When the path behind disappears, you no longer need to be understood through the lens of who you used to be. You allow the misunderstanding to pass. You walk on. This walking forward is not always literal. Sometimes it's an inner shift, a subtle refusal to participate in your own rehashing, a choice to no longer react to old triggers, a breath taken in the middle of a familiar story that you now choose not to repeat. These moments are quiet, but they are powerful. They are the steps that dissolve the trail behind you. In Buddhist meditation, this awareness is cultivated by staying close to now, not trying to stay present, but letting presence be enough. Watching the thoughts come, letting them pass, watching the urge to return to a memory, letting it fall away, over and over. And in this repetition, the past loses weight. It becomes a cloud you no longer chase. You begin to see that what matters is not what happened, but what is happening. Not the road behind, but the one unfolding under your feet. And even that road doesn't need to be mapped. It doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be walked. One step, one breath, one quiet surrender at a time. There is a great relief in no longer narrating everything, no longer needing to make it make sense. Some things don't make sense. Some chapters won't have clean endings. Some people will never say what you needed them to say. But the story does not need to be finished to stop reading it. You are allowed to close the book, to put it down, to walk forward without looking back. This is how the path disappears behind you, not by force, not by forgetting, but by no longer needing to hold it in place. Memory softens when it's no longer fed, and presence expands when it's no longer interrupted. You will still carry wisdom from the past, but you will carry it lightly, like seeds, not stones. You'll plant them as needed. Let them grow in silence. Let them bloom into moments that feel nothing like what came before. The self that walks now is not a continuation of your history. It is a new awareness, one that doesn't look back for proof, one that doesn't use the past to define what's possible, one that trusts the moment, even if it's uncertain, especially when it's uncertain. And when someone asks, "How did you get here?" you may not know what to say. You may not remember all the turns. You may not feel the need to explain, and that too is freedom. The path behind you may be invisible, but the path beneath you is real, and that is enough. So let it disappear. Let the old questions fade. Let the story soften until only presence remains. Because the present doesn't need a history to be alive. It only needs attention, and when you give it that fully, you realize something extraordinary. You are not the product of what happened. You are the expression of what's happening now. And now that the path behind has vanished, now that the need to track where you've been has dissolved into presence, you begin to sense something even deeper shifting. You are no longer just a person walking forward. You are becoming something else entirely, less separate, less defined, more open, more connected. The boundaries that once felt so real begin to blur, and where there was once a self-navigating life, there is now only life moving. This is the moment when the raindrop begins to merge with the lake. There is a difference between thinking you are part of something and directly experiencing that you've never been separate. Most spiritual paths speak of connection, but few stay long enough in silence to feel what that connection actually is. It's not a metaphor, it's not a belief, it's a dissolution of the idea that you were ever outside of the whole. The raindrop doesn't fight to retain its shape when it meets the lake. It doesn't argue for its identity. It falls, merges, and disappears into something larger, but not into nothingness, into fullness, into total presence. That's what the ego fears most. Not death, but dissolving, losing its edges, losing its story. But what it calls loss is actually return. The mind becomes quiet, not because it is defeated, but because it is no longer isolated. Ego dissolution is not the destruction of the self. It is the recognition that the self was never solid to begin with, that the boundaries were always temporary, that everything you thought you had to defend was made of thought, not truth. When this is seen, the tension that held the mind apart begins to soften. In Buddhist practice, this is known as interbeing. It means nothing exists by itself. A flower contains the rain, the soil, the sunlight, the gardener. The moment it stands alone, it disappears. The same is true of people. You are not just you. You are your ancestors, your teachers, your environment, your choices. Even your breath is shared. Even your thoughts are shaped by voices you've heard. The belief in a separate, fixed self is a habit of perception, not a fact. This understanding does not come through theory. It comes through stillness, through dropping beneath the surface of thought, where the idea of self can no longer hold, where the body becomes sensation, the breath becomes wind, the mind becomes sky, and the sense of I begins to fade, not as a failure, but as a release. Many resist this. The ego thrives on being seen, being different, being right. It measures itself against others to feel real, but in doing so, it forgets what it already is. It forgets that its true nature is not in being separate, but in belonging, and not just to people or places, but to the entire unfolding of life. To merge with the lake is to stop seeing yourself as a drop that must stand out. It is to relax into a deeper presence that doesn't need to be special to be sacred. This doesn't make you disappear. It makes you more present than ever, no longer caught in self-reference, no longer translating every experience into me and mine. Just awareness, moving without interruption. This shift is not passive, it is alive. When the self softens, compassion flows more easily. Judgment fades. Comparison dies. You see others not as threats, not as strangers, but as extensions of the same field of being. Their suffering becomes your own. Their joy expands your chest, not through empathy, but through shared existence. and the nervous system responds. The moment the sense of separation fades, the body begins to rest. Because the deepest stress is the stress of isolation, the belief that you are alone in your pain, alone in your effort, alone in your mind. But when you begin to feel the lake, that stress dissolves. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to fix everything. You are not carrying it by yourself. In meditation, this is experienced in flashes. You sit, you breathe, and suddenly the breath is not happening in you, it's happening as you. The sounds around you are not distractions, they are part of your experience. The space between thoughts becomes wider, and in that space, the sense of being a separate self begins to fade. There's no need to push it. The more you try to dissolve the ego, the more it resists. The more you relax, the more it softens. It's like holding ice in warm hands. You don't have to crush it, you just stay. You breathe, and slowly the edges melt. This kind of awareness doesn't need identity to function. You can still speak, move, decide, but the tension behind it is gone. You are no longer proving yourself to the world. You are simply participating, like a wave participating in the ocean, unique in shape, but never separate in substance. The more this is felt, the more life begins to reorient. You stop trying to win. You start trying to listen. You stop trying to be right. You start trying to be real. You stop needing validation. You start offering presence, not because you've become better, but because you've become quieter, less concerned with the self-image, more attuned to the shared field. And in this field, time slows. The future becomes less important. The past becomes less sticky. The moment becomes deep, full, satisfying. Not because something amazing is happening, but because you're no longer outside of it. You're no longer watching life. You are life, aware of itself. This is not the end of thinking. It's the end of being ruled by thought. Thought continues, but it becomes lighter, less possessive, less personal. It becomes a tool, not a master, and you become the space that holds it all, not the story it tells. The practice continues in daily life. When the ego reasserts itself through irritation, pride, comparison, you return to breath, to stillness, to sensation. You remember the lake. You remember that there is nothing to defend, that what you are cannot be harmed by opinion, that the deeper you rest, the more clearly you see. And what you begin to see is that everyone is the same, different in form, in history, in behavior, but made of the same awareness. All of us drops, all of us water, all of us returning. This realization brings a kind of humility, not self-denial, self-inclusion. You no longer need to be the center. You no longer need to be separate to be valuable. You simply exist within everything else, and that is enough. From this space, service becomes natural, not duty, not guilt, just movement. Kindness flows because it's the most direct expression of connection. Forgiveness arises because you're no longer so tightly gripped by your identity. Even silence feels nourishing because you're no longer trying to fill it with yourself. And in this quiet, the heart opens, not in a dramatic way, in a soft, steady way, like a flower that doesn't need attention to bloom. It opens because the conditions are right, because you are no longer resisting the sun. This is the peace of the lake, the peace that does not depend on achievement, opinion, or control. It comes from no longer being cut off, from no longer needing to stand out, from realizing that everything you were trying to become, you already are, once you stop holding yourself apart. And once the drop has dissolved, once the illusion of separation fades and the mind finally returns to the vastness it never left, there is something even deeper that comes to the surface. Pain. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as sensation that no longer has to be owned. In the lake, pain still appears, but it's not as sharp, not as personal, not as defining. It is simply part of the movement, and in this new clarity, a new relationship begins. The awareness that sees it does not flinch, it does not react, it watches. And now we meet the watcher who smiled at pain. Pain is not the enemy, reaction is. Pain is a signal, reaction is a pattern. Most of the suffering people carry does not come from pain itself. It comes from what the mind does with it. It fights, it judges, it resists, it attaches, and in that effort to avoid or control, the pain grows teeth. It becomes heavier, more personal. It turns from a moment into a story, and from that story, suffering begins. The watcher does not add story. It does not try to fix the pain. It does not try to remove it. It simply sees it, clearly, without tension, without narrative, like looking at a fire from a safe distance, not to extinguish it, not to fan it, just to watch it burn. And in that space between the flame and the observer, a quiet strength appears. Not resistance, presence. In Buddhist meditation, this is one of the deepest teachings: to become the silent witness to sensation, to stop being the one who suffers and instead become the one who sees. This shift is subtle but powerful. It changes everything. Because pain, when observed without identity, begins to move. It may still hurt, but it no longer defines the one who feels it. The body may ache, the heart may sting, but the awareness remains still. It doesn't collapse into the discomfort. It holds it, like sky holds the storm, not afraid, not avoiding, just allowing. And this allowing, strangely enough, is where the transformation begins. Pain that is allowed begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer fought. This is not passive acceptance. It is deep intelligence, the kind of intelligence that knows pain is part of life, but suffering is optional. The ego suffers because it takes pain personally. It says, "This shouldn't be happening to me." But the watcher sees pain as part of impermanence, as sensation arising and falling within the larger field. Not wrong, just present. And that's the key. Pain is bearable when it is just what it is. It becomes unbearable when it is turned into identity. I am broken. I am a victim. This always happens to me. These thoughts are not pain. They are suffering. They are the layers added on top. The watcher does not add those layers. It sees them too, and it lets them pass. Watching pain with presence does not mean becoming numb. It means becoming spacious. Spaciousness is what makes pain passable. When the mind is tight, pain becomes a wall. When the mind is open, pain becomes a wave. It rises, it peaks, it falls, and it does so without needing a reason, without needing to justify itself, just like weather. Even intense emotional pain can be met this way. Grief, fear, loneliness. These are not mistakes. they are energies moving through. When felt from within the story, they consume. When observed from presence, they pass. Not because they are less real, but because the identification has been dropped. The watcher does not say, "I am in pain." It says, "Pain is here." That shift in language is not a trick. It is a truth. You are not the sensation. You are the awareness that holds the sensation. And when this is remembered, a kind of smile appears, not a smile of denial, but a smile of understanding, a quiet knowing that even this, too, can be held. This smile is not always literal. It is energetic. It is the body no longer tightening, the breath staying steady, the heart remaining open. That is the smile. The nervous system no longer spiraling, the mind no longer defending. That is the smile. It says, "I do not need to escape this. I only need to witness it." And this witnessing creates healing. Not always in the way people expect. The pain may not vanish, but its grip loosens, its weight lifts, its meaning changes. It becomes part of life, not a threat to it. The moment you stop needing pain to stop, it begins to transform. This is where strength comes from, not from avoiding discomfort, but from learning how to stay with it, learning how to remain while it rises, breathing through it, watching it without ownership, and seeing again and again that it does not last, that it never lasts, that even the sharpest ache eventually softens into something else. And what's left is not just relief. What's left is trust. A deep trust in your own presence, a confidence that you can face life, not because you're unbreakable, but because you no longer break apart when pain visits. You remain whole. Whole because you've stopped turning every wound into a definition. Whole because you've stopped collapsing into the moment. This trust ripples into everything, into how you meet other people's pain. You stop trying to fix. You stop offering shallow comforts. You begin to offer space. Space that says, "I see your pain, and I am not afraid of it." That space is the deepest kind of healing. Not words, not solutions, just presence. And you begin to see the beauty in all of it. The way pain teaches humility. The way discomfort reveals attachment. The way even heartbreak shows where love was too tightly held. None of this is wasted. All of it is part of the path. And the watcher sees it all, with patience, with steadiness, with that quiet, knowing smile. This is the beginning of liberation, not from pain, but from being bound by it, from believing it defines you, from needing to explain or justify it. You become like the mountain that holds the storm, not moved by the wind, not afraid of the thunder, still, grounded, watching. And when the storm passes, as it always does, you remain. Not untouched, but unshaken. Not hardened, but open. This is the strength of the watcher, not in being above pain, in being with it, in staying soft while everything sharp passes through. So the next time discomfort rises, meet it like this. Feel it fully, but do not claim it. Watch it without resistance. Let it move. Let it teach. Let it leave. And smile, not because you enjoy it, but because you trust yourself to remain whole in its presence. And now that pain has been met with presence, now that the watcher has smiled without flinching, without fleeing, without turning discomfort into identity, something even more delicate begins to reveal itself. The mind, no longer overwhelmed by reaction, begins to slow, and in that slowing, there are moments so small they often go unnoticed. Not the thoughts, not the breath, not the feeling, but what holds all of it. The space, the soft, quiet opening between one thought and the next. A place most never visit, a silence most never trust. But in that tiny pause lives something vast, freedom. Now we enter the space between two thoughts. Thoughts come like waves, one after another. Memory, judgment, plan, interpretation, worry, commentary. Each one rising and falling so quickly that it creates the illusion of a solid stream. But if you look closely, if you really watch, you will see the gaps. You will feel the pause. You will notice that between the end of one thought and the start of another, there is silence, not emptiness, stillness. And that stillness holds more truth than the thought ever could. Most people live entirely inside their thinking. They never step outside the stream. They identify so completely with their mind's voice that they cannot even recognize it as a voice. It becomes their world, their truth, their self. But the moment you glimpse the space between thoughts, you see something different. You see that thinking is not you. It is something that happens to you. Something you can witness, like breath, like sound. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary is possible. The end of compulsive thinking. This doesn't mean thoughts stop. It means you no longer chase them. You no longer need them to explain everything. You no longer fear the silence between them. Because in that silence, you begin to feel yourself as more than a thinker. You begin to feel yourself as presence. And presence does not require narrative to exist. The addiction to thinking is not just mental, it is emotional, psychological, cultural. People believe that if they stop thinking, they will disappear. They believe silence is absence. That not having a thought is the same as being lost. But the opposite is true. You are never more fully here than when the mind goes quiet. You are never more alive than when thought steps aside and lets awareness speak. In meditation, this space is not forced. It is revealed. You sit, you breathe, you observe the thoughts rise and fall. You don't grab, you don't push, and slowly the gaps appear. At first, they are brief, barely there. A second of stillness, then another. The more you stay with them, the more they stretch. Not because you are making them longer, but because you are no longer filling them with commentary. Thoughts are not enemies, they are tools. But a tool held too tightly becomes a weapon. The space between thoughts is what softens the grip. What lets you use the mind without being used by it. What lets you rest while still being awake. This resting is not laziness, it is clarity. When the mind stops spinning, your vision becomes clear. You begin to see things as they are, not as the mind says they are. You hear without translating. You feel without dramatizing. You move without overthinking every step. The space gives you back what the noise took. The nervous system responds too. When thoughts slow, the body calms. The breath deepens. The heart rate lowers. The brain shifts into coherence, not because you are doing anything, but because you have stopped doing too much. You have stopped adding unnecessary activity to every moment. And from this calm, something else arises. Intuition, not the loud voice of desire or fear, but the soft guidance that comes from stillness. The kind of knowing that doesn't argue, that doesn't need proof. It simply feels aligned. That knowing lives in the space between thoughts. It's hard to hear when the mind is noisy, but in silence it becomes unmistakable. This is also where creativity lives. The best ideas don't come when you're trying to force them. They come in the pause, in the shower, on a walk, in the space between trying. Because creativity, like insight, needs room, not pressure, room. And when the mind is not full, it becomes a vessel for something deeper, truer, quieter. Thoughts are often repetitive. The same loops, the same worries, the same judgments. But silence is always fresh. It doesn't repeat. It just is. And when you rest in that freshness, the patterns begin to dissolve. You stop living the same day over and over. You begin to experience newness, not because the world changed, but because you are finally seeing it without the filter of thought. This space also reveals the truth about control. Most people think they need to manage everything, every outcome, every interaction. But when you're not constantly thinking, you start to notice how life moves without your constant input. How breath happens, how healing happens, how connection happens when you stop trying to control it. And in that noticing, control begins to release its grip. The ego doesn't like this. It thrives on noise. It feels validated when it's thinking, but it's also exhausted, deeply, secretly. And silence is not its death. It's its rest. The more you visit the space between thoughts, the more the ego softens. Not because it's attacked, because it's finally being given rest. And you begin to carry that space with you, even in conversation, even in movement. A pause before speaking, a breath before reacting, a moment of stillness before choosing. This is where wisdom begins, not in knowing everything, but in knowing when not to speak, when not to act, when not to fill the space just to avoid feeling. Because sometimes what you're avoiding is the very thing you need to feel. And only in silence does it rise, not to hurt you, but to be seen, held, released. You also begin to sense how thought is always late. It arrives after the moment, trying to explain what already happened. But presence is on time. Presence lives now. The space between thoughts is not in the past. It's not planning the future. It's here, always, waiting, quiet, ready, and it's enough. That's what becomes most clear. You don't need the next thought to be okay. You don't need to solve the moment, to rest in it. The space is not an interruption. It's the truth, the real home. And the more you rest in it, the more you trust it. You don't need to chase enlightenment. You don't need to escape your life. You just need to notice what's already here, beneath the noise, behind the eyes, before the next thought forms. That is where you meet the mind's original nature, open, unbound, free. So the next time you sit, listen for the space. Not the silence outside, but the one inside. The one between words, between breaths, between thoughts. Let yourself stretch there. Let yourself rest there. Let yourself be there, not as a thought, but as awareness itself. And after resting in the space between thoughts, after discovering that silence is not empty but alive with presence, something deeper becomes possible. Not just stillness in meditation, but stillness in the storm. Not just peace in silence, but peace while surrounded by noise. It's one thing to be calm when everything is quiet, but the real teaching begins when the world shakes, when people provoke, when chaos arrives. In that moment, the space inside either contracts or expands, and here we meet the mirror that refused to react. There is a power in reflection, but there is a deeper power in not reflecting what distorts. A regular mirror throws back whatever appears before it: anger, confusion, fear, judgment. But the awakened mind does not mirror chaos with more chaos. It sees clearly. It stays still. It reflects truth, not turbulence. It becomes the kind of mirror that stays smooth even when the world throws stones. This is what Buddhism calls equanimity, the ability to remain undisturbed, not cold, not numb, present, awake, but unshaken. The surface may ripple, but the depth remains untouched. This is not something born out of indifference. It is born out of understanding. You stop reacting not because you no longer care, but because you finally see clearly that reaction adds more suffering. To be the mirror that doesn't react means to stop confusing other people's chaos with your responsibility. Their anger is not your failure. Their confusion is not your burden. You can see it. You can hold space for it, but you do not need to reflect it back. You do not need to match their frequency to prove you're listening. Sometimes silence is the highest form of presence. This stillness is a practice. It begins small, with a breath when someone interrupts, with a pause before the retort, with the moment you choose to listen instead of win. Every time you break the loop of reactivity, the mirror becomes clearer. Every time you return to presence instead of impulse, the mind becomes stronger, and over time, the nervous system learns this stillness. It begins to anticipate chaos without collapse. The heart rate stays steady. The breath slows. The body remembers that it does not need to tense just because the environment is tense. This is not apathy. This is mastery, the mastery of energy, not of others. Many people misunderstand equanimity. They think it means suppressing emotion, but emotion still arises. The mirror still feels. It just doesn't distort. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't retaliate. It holds with clarity, with compassion, without becoming tangled. And in doing so, it changes the energy of the space. Just like one calm person can shift the tone of a whole room. Just like one candle can reveal the size of the room without shouting. The still mind becomes a kind of permission, a reminder to others that reaction is not required, that there is another way. This doesn't mean you never speak or act. It means your action comes from choice, not impulse. From wisdom, not ego. You begin to notice how often reaction comes from the need to protect identity, to defend a belief, to assert control. But when identity softens, when belief becomes flexible, when control is no longer the goal, the need to react fades. You can still set boundaries, you can still walk away, but without the storm inside, without the need to punish or be right. That is the mirror's gift. It doesn't say, "I don't care." It says, I see you clearly, and I remain grounded. And that clarity becomes your protection. When others try to pull you into drama, into guilt, into their confusion, you don't have to resist. You simply reflect nothing back. You let their waves pass through you like wind through trees, not because you're passive, because you're rooted. In the deepest Buddhist teachings, this is known as upekkha, serene balance. The mind that watches gain and loss, praise and blame, success and failure, without clinging to any of it. Not because those things don't matter, but because none of them change what you are. The mirror doesn't break just because the face in front of it frowns. Your stillness does not vanish just because the world is loud. You begin to carry that stillness not as a shield, but as a way of being, and it makes you stronger, not in appearance, but in presence. And in this presence, people begin to shift around you, not because you try to change them, but because your calmness disrupts the usual pattern. When someone expects a fight and gets silence, they pause. When someone expects judgment and gets still listening, something softens. You are no longer participating in the unconscious play. You've stepped off the stage and into awareness. That shift is contagious. People don't always understand it, but they feel it. And often, without knowing why, they begin to mirror your stillness. Your calm becomes a mirror too, reflecting back not their chaos, but their potential for peace. Even your thoughts begin to change. When the mind is reactive, every thought feels urgent. But when the mirror is still, thoughts slow down. They become clearer. You begin to see them not as commands, but as clouds, some heavy, some light, all passing. And you smile, not because life is easy, but because you are no longer chasing every thought, no longer grabbing every emotion, no longer believing every judgment. You see clearly, and that clarity brings peace. This peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the absence of unnecessary noise. It is the ability to feel everything without becoming lost in anything, to hold space for life without letting it unseat you, to be like a mirror, not rejecting, not exaggerating, just holding what is. This holding is not neutral, it is kind. The mirror does not fight the image, it just reflects with honesty. That's the heart of this practice, staying honest in presence, not amplifying, not defending, just being. And you begin to trust yourself more, because you're no longer afraid of conflict or chaos or even of your own pain. You've trained the mind not to flare up, not to flinch. You've watched it enough times to know nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be fueled, just seen, and in seeing, it dissolves. This doesn't make you unfeeling. It makes you deeply sensitive without fragility, like still water that feels every drop but stays whole, like a mountain that feels every breeze but does not lean. And so, when the next disturbance comes, and it will, you breathe, you pause, you meet it with the clarity of the mirror. You reflect nothing back that does not serve. You speak, if needed, from steadiness. And then you return, always return, to the stillness that cannot be shaken. And once the mirror no longer reacts, once it stops reflecting chaos with more chaos and becomes still in the face of disturbance, another kind of clarity becomes possible. Not through effort, not through insight, but through stillness, real stillness, not as a trick to avoid thought, but as the ground that allows thought to settle. The kind of stillness that doesn't reach for peace, but creates space for it. What happens next is not control. It's patience, a waiting that isn't waiting, a calm that doesn't push. It's here that we meet the dust that settled on the mind. There is nothing broken about the mind, but it becomes cloudy when constantly stirred. Thoughts swirl, emotions shift, desires tug, stories replay, and like dust in the air, the more you wave your hands at it, the more it spins. That's what most people do when discomfort appears. They interfere. They analyze. They resist. They try to understand or push away. But clarity does not come from movement. It comes from quiet. The dust settles on its own. That's the lesson. And yet, the hardest thing for most minds is to let it, to leave the noise alone, to allow the confusion without explaining it, to allow the sadness without solving it, to allow the fear without controlling it. But that's exactly what this practice is. Not doing nothing, but not adding more. You sit, you notice the thoughts, you notice the tension, you notice the restlessness that says, fix this. But instead of reacting, you watch. You do not join. You let the dust float. You let the mind move as it must, and slowly, without force, the particles begin to drop. The storm calms, not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. This kind of patience feels strange at first. We are taught to solve everything. We are told that silence means something is wrong, but the deepest healing happens when the mind is allowed to breathe. Not pushed, not pulled, just left alone. Like muddy water that becomes clear only when left still. Even the most complicated emotions settle in time. Guilt, anger, shame, confusion. These are not permanent conditions. They are patterns. They rise when disturbed. They fade when seen, and they vanish when left to settle. The more you interfere, the longer they stay. The more you observe, the more they dissolve. Mental noise is like dust, not because it's dirty, but because it floats when disturbed. Thought is not the enemy. It's the movement around thought that clouds the space. You don't have to stop thinking. You just have to stop chasing the thought once it begins. You don't have to find silence. You just have to stop blocking it. The body knows this. When the mind quiets, the breath deepens, the heartbeat slows. The nervous system moves from defense to balance. The space between thoughts grows longer. Awareness begins to expand, and in that expansion, stillness feels natural, no longer forced, no longer effortful, just present. And in that stillness, clarity comes not as a reward, but as a side effect. You begin to feel the mind settle the way dust settles in a sunlit room, softly, slowly, without noise. It doesn't need help. It only needs space. That's the discipline, not controlling the mind, but giving it enough space to stop spinning. This patience becomes your strength, because when you stop trying to fix your mind, you stop adding tension to it. When you stop needing an answer, your attention becomes light, and that lightness is what makes thoughts lose their weight. You no longer fear the storm, you simply wait for the calm. You also begin to realize that not every thought deserves your attention. Some are echoes, some are habits, some are simply noise. Not everything that arises is meaningful. Not everything that feels urgent is real. The dust that clouds the mind often looks like truth, but it's just agitation. When you learn to wait, the false drops, and what's true remains. This does not make you passive, it makes you wise. Reaction is not always strength. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes the deepest intelligence is found in restraint. Not because you're avoiding life, but because you're no longer trying to control what needs no control. And this patience begins to change everything. In conversations, you pause before speaking. In conflict, you feel the urge to react and choose stillness instead. In decision-making, you wait until the mental water clears, no longer out of fear, out of trust. Trust that what is real will remain, and what is noise will pass. Even pain becomes more bearable in this space. You no longer need to fix it immediately. You no longer fear it. You sit with it. You breathe with it, and you let it move as it must. The dust is not the enemy. It is only a signal, and the more gently you treat it, the faster it settles. There is also humility here, a recognition that the mind is not a machine to be optimized. It is a sky. Thoughts are its weather, sometimes clear, sometimes stormy, but always moving. And your job is not to control the sky. Your job is to remember that the sky is not the storm. Stillness also teaches you how little is required to feel peace. No solution, no achievement. Just this moment, undisturbed. The chair, the breath, the sensation of being alive. When the dust settles, these small things become radiant. When the noise drops, presence becomes vivid. This kind of clarity does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, not as a revelation, but as a lack of confusion. You don't feel euphoric. You feel clear. You don't feel powerful. You feel light. You don't feel full of answers. You feel free from the need for them. And you begin to carry this with you, not just in meditation, in life. You speak with less urgency. You move with less friction. You listen with more openness, because the dust has settled, and now you can see. Not just others, but yourself. Not just situations, but the patterns behind them. Not just thoughts, but the awareness that holds them. That awareness becomes your home. The dust may rise again, it always does, but you no longer fear it. You no longer fight it. You simply wait. You sit. You breathe. You watch. And it passes. Always. And now that the dust has settled, now that the mind has been allowed to breathe without interference, now that clarity has emerged from stillness rather than force, something begins to shift deeper inside. Not silence this time, but energy. Not wild, not violent, not chaotic. An energy that doesn't burn, but warms. A heat that does not consume, but nourishes. Because once the mind has stopped spinning, it no longer explodes in defense. It glows in presence. This is the fire that warmed without burning. Energy is not the problem. Reaction is. Passion is not the enemy. Attachment is. There is nothing wrong with fire. Fire only becomes destructive when it is left unattended, uncontained, or uncontrolled. The same is true within us. What we often call anger is not fire. It's fire that's lost its shape. It's a flame that's been denied or misdirected. But when cultivated with awareness, the very same energy becomes life-giving. It becomes strength that does not harm, heat that does not damage, light that guides but does not blind. Mindfulness is the practice of holding this fire gently, of learning how to feel fully without turning that feeling into harm. When you feel anger rising, it doesn't mean you've failed. It means the fire has been lit. The question is not how to get rid of it. The question is how to sit beside it without fueling it unnecessarily. The fire is not here to destroy. It's here to show you something, but only if you're still enough to listen. Most people were never taught how to do this. Anger, jealousy, frustration, even intense joy, all of these energies were either suppressed or unleashed, explosive or ignored, but neither of these extremes are peace. One burns the house down, the other leaves you freezing in the dark. The middle way is mindfulness, presence, the ability to feel the flame rise, but to keep your hands open. This is especially important in relationships. Intimacy stirs the fire, connection reveals heat, vulnerability opens old wounds, and the temptation is to lash out, to defend, to retreat. But when you have trained with the fire, you don't run from heat. You breathe with it. You feel the chest tighten, the voice begin to rise, and instead of speaking immediately, you pause. You listen, not to the words forming in your mind, but to the sensation, the energy, the origin of the flame. Often, it's not the present moment causing the fire, it's the past. It's a memory, a trigger, a fear of being dismissed or misunderstood. And if you react from that place, you're not really in the moment. You're reliving something old. But if you stay with the heat without reacting, something beautiful happens. The fire becomes awareness. You begin to feel it without weaponizing it. You begin to speak from it without letting it take over. You begin to remain whole even when the emotion is intense. That's the fire that warms. It doesn't avoid the difficult moment. It enters it with care, with presence, with the clarity that was born in silence. It doesn't mean you never speak passionately. It means your passion is aligned with kindness, with truth, with patience. Contained energy is powerful. A focused flame can light a room. A scattered one can burn it down. The more you practice watching your energy without suppressing or exploding, the more skillful you become. The more moments you create that don't need repair. The more conversations you finish with understanding instead of regret. Inner conflict responds the same way. When you fight with yourself, judging, correcting, overthinking, you often do it with fire that turns inward. You burn yourself trying to feel okay, but mindfulness turns that energy into warmth instead. You say, I see the pain, I feel the tension, I won't run and I won't attack. That's compassion, and compassion is fire in its most healing form. This kind of warmth becomes your atmosphere. People feel safer around you, not because you're perfect, but because you're steady, because you radiate energy without imposing it, because you offer heat without expectation. You become a quiet fire, one that draws others in, not to change them, but to hold space with them. This is not weakness. It's immense strength. It's what happens when you no longer need to be feared to feel heard, when you no longer use your words to win, but to open, when you no longer hold your love hostage to control outcomes. The fire that warms trusts the process. It doesn't panic when the room grows cold. It knows it will return. It knows it can stay lit through breath, through silence, through care. Even in solitude, this fire matters. When you sit alone and restlessness rises, the fire will flicker. The urge to distract, the pressure to escape. But if you stay, if you breathe, if you let the heat rise and fall, you learn something vital. You do not need to be entertained to be at peace. You only need to be present. The warmth is already within you. Over time, this inner fire becomes your home. You don't need validation to stay lit. You don't need agreement to remain centered. You begin to glow from within, even on hard days, especially on hard days, because the flame has been trained, not by force, but by patience. And as it glows, it spreads, quietly. Not in dominance, but in example. People feel your warmth and begin to soften. They feel your steadiness and begin to relax. You don't need to preach. You just live the teaching. One pause at a time, one breath at a time, one mindful moment after another. This warmth also makes forgiveness possible, not by denying hurt, but by holding it without more harm. When the fire warms instead of burns, it says, I can feel this pain and still remain kind. I can carry this truth and still speak gently. This is rare and powerful and deeply needed, because the world does not need more heat. It needs more warmth, more people who've learned to tend to their own energy, more people who can stay near discomfort without making it worse, more people who've sat beside their own fire long enough to know how not to spread it in pain. And once the fire has warmed without burning, once energy is no longer explosive but held with tenderness, once presence replaces defense and heat becomes healing, a softer intelligence begins to unfold. Not driven, not seeking, not grasping for the next step or the final word, just here. Not as a gap between thoughts or a silence between breaths, but as something whole, unmoving, complete without explanation. And in this quiet, something extraordinary is revealed, a kind of answer that doesn't come at the end of a search, an answer that was never missing. This is the answer that didn't need a question. The human mind is a machine of inquiry. It spins, it seeks, it chases closure. It wants to know why, how, when, what's next. From the moment a child can speak, questions become the background hum of life. But in the search for certainty, the mind rarely finds rest, because every answer creates another question. Every conclusion carries the seed of doubt. And so the search never ends, unless you let it. Stillness begins when the need to resolve stops, when the need to explain, justify, or understand falls away. This isn't confusion, it's clarity without tension. It's not knowing everything, it's not needing to. It's the peace that arises when the mind stops demanding that life prove itself. Not because life gave you what you wanted, but because you stopped measuring everything against your expectations. This stillness is not passive, it's alive. It doesn't retreat from life, it fully participates without clinging. It watches thoughts arise, but doesn't chase them to the end. It hears emotions stir, but doesn't require a reason. It feels the ache of uncertainty without collapsing into fear. This is what the answer without a question feels like. full, quiet, clear. You don't find this state by thinking your way into it. You don't arrive through explanation. You arrive through release, through softening the grip, through letting the questions come and go without needing to pin them down. You sit, you breathe, you notice the mind wanting to figure something out, and you let it pass, over and over, until the mind begins to trust what it once feared, the absence of answers. That trust is everything, because without it, silence feels like failure. Without it, stillness feels like avoidance. But with trust, the space becomes sacred, not because it's filled with insight, but because it's no longer filled with striving. The wisdom that lives here does not speak in words. It speaks in presence, in the simple, radiant truth of being. There comes a moment when the deepest peace is not in what you understand, but in what you no longer need to understand. You don't need to know why they left. You don't need to know where you'll be in 10 years. You don't need to know if your path is correct. You rest in the now, not because it answers all the questions, but because it stops needing to. And when questions do arise, and they will, they are no longer burdens. They are clouds passing through a vast sky. You don't grasp them. You don't panic. You watch them move. Some may bring insight. Some may bring nothing. But none of them shake your ground, because your peace is not built on answers. It's built on awareness. This awareness is what allows the heart to open without fear, to love without guarantees, to live without the illusion of control. The need for constant explanation dissolves, and in its place, life becomes simple again. Not because everything makes sense, but because it no longer has to. Even in meditation, this shift is profound. At first, practice may begin with effort. Focus on breath, return from distraction, analyze sensations. But over time, the most powerful sitting comes not from effort, but from surrender, from letting the mind float without needing a destination, from letting each moment stand on its own without being compared to what came before or what's supposed to come next. This surrender isn't giving up. It's giving space. It's realizing that the most powerful answers are not those spoken. They're those lived. The way a tree grows without understanding the soil. The way water flows without needing to know where the river ends. You begin to live like that, not in confusion, but in rhythm. The rhythm of presence is not linear. It doesn't follow logic. It doesn't argue with reality. It just aligns with it. When the mind no longer demands certainty, the body softens, the breath deepens, the nervous system feels safe again, not because danger has disappeared, but because the inner war is over. In relationships, this kind of peace changes everything. You stop needing to resolve every argument. You stop needing the other person to see everything your way. You begin to offer space instead of conclusions. You begin to listen without preparing your response. You begin to connect without filtering everything through the mind's approval. This stillness is magnetic, not because it pulls people toward you, but because it allows them to relax around you. People sense when they're not being analyzed, not being fixed, not being measured. They open, they soften, they begin to taste the peace you carry, not the peace of perfection, but the peace of non-resistance. This also applies to your relationship with yourself. The part of you that's always trying to figure yourself out finally gets to rest. The need to diagnose every emotion, label every experience, fix every flaw. It all begins to fade. And in its place, there's room for something much more honest, presence without a problem to solve. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to feel lost. You are allowed to simply breathe without planning the next chapter. These aren't gaps in life. These are the living moments. And once the pressure to have answers falls away, you begin to feel the richness of what's actually here. Even creative energy changes. You stop trying to make everything meaningful. You stop waiting for inspiration to strike like lightning. You begin to create from stillness, from wholeness, from the part of you that doesn't need to prove anything. And what you make feels different, more natural, less forced, because it wasn't born from question, it was born from still presence. This is the invitation to rest in being, not knowing, to become the field, not the search, to live not for clarity, but from it, not the clarity that answers, but the clarity that no longer needs to. And what rises from this space is not indifference, it's love, a love not built on certainty or closure, but on quiet seeing, a love that doesn't need to understand everything to care deeply, a love that doesn't rush, that doesn't grasp, that simply holds. And once the answer no longer needs a question, once the mind no longer demands closure to rest, once presence becomes the resting place instead of the tool to get somewhere, something even more tender begins to unfold. The heart, no longer burdened by proving or resolving, starts to open, quietly, naturally, not to earn, not to impress, not to win favor, just to shine, just to share, just to soften into the moment without asking it to pay you back. This is the beginning of the smile that asked for nothing. There is a kind of smile that doesn't wait for anything. It doesn't depend on approval. It doesn't need to be seen to exist. It rises not as a response, but as a way of being. It carries no hooks, no hidden expectations, no strategy. It is a gentle radiance born from inner sufficiency. It gives and gives and gives, and asks for nothing in return, not out of weakness, out of wholeness. Unconditional friendliness is not just a phrase. It is a posture of the heart. A decision to meet yourself and others with the kindness that is not delayed until improvement, agreement, or validation arrives. It is the deep understanding that kindness is not something you do to get love. It is what flows when you remember you already are love. That nothing needs to change for care to appear. When the smile no longer needs a reason, it becomes freedom. Because now you are not trapped in the world's reactions. You are no longer adjusting your kindness based on how someone treats you. You are no longer closing your heart when someone fails to open theirs. You become steady in your warmth, not robotic, not fake, but untethered from the constant bargaining of conditional affection. The most powerful love is not the one that rewards behavior. It's the one that stays present even when the behavior is difficult. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you stop punishing. You stop withdrawing love to prove a point. You stop offering smiles only to those who deserve them, because you see now, everyone is carrying invisible weight. Everyone is still learning, including you. This includes how you treat yourself. That's where it begins. If your inner smile only shows up when you feel accomplished or admired, it is still a currency. not a gift. But when the smile appears, even on hard days, even when the inner critic is loud, even when you feel tired, lost, or unsure, that's when it becomes something sacred, not a reward, a home. This unconditional friendliness to yourself is a quiet rebellion. It says, I will not abandon myself for not being better. I will not delay softness until I earn it. I will not treat my own presence as a mistake to be corrected. Instead, I will smile, gently, steadily, even through the mess. And when this friendliness becomes real, something profound happens. You stop being dangerous to yourself. You stop beating yourself up in the name of growth. You stop weaponizing reflection. You stop turning every flaw into a reason to withdraw care. And in that space, healing becomes possible. Not because you fixed everything, but because you finally stopped fighting the one who needed the most peace, yourself. From this inner friendliness, outer compassion flows more easily. You start to notice the small moments where someone else is struggling, not through their words, but through the way their voice tightens, the way they pull away, the way they try too hard to seem fine. And your response changes. You stop needing them to be pleasant for you to be kind. You stop expecting them to be emotionally generous before you soften your tone. You offer your smile not as a reward for good behavior, but as a statement of shared humanity. This is not naivety, it's depth. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need someone to be lovable to be loved. You begin to see that the ones who are the hardest to love are often the ones who forgot what love feels like. And maybe your smile, unasked for, unearned, is the first gentle thing they've met in a long time. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm. It means you don't mirror it. You can set a boundary with warmth. You can say no without turning cold. You can walk away without wishing pain on the one you're leaving. That's the smile that asked for nothing. It gives even in the leaving, not because it wants to be admired, but because it doesn't know how not to care. And this care becomes your strength. In a world of transaction, you become sanctuary. In a world of sharp replies and quick judgments, you become pause. In a world where everyone is afraid of not being enough, you become a quiet reminder that worth was never up for debate. This friendliness is not a technique. It's a remembering, a return. Every time you catch yourself withdrawing kindness as a strategy, to punish, to protect, to test, you return. Every time you notice the coldness in your own thoughts about someone who didn't meet your standards, you soften, not because they changed, but because you did. The smile is not just a gesture, it's a signal to the nervous system. It says, we are safe here. We don't have to perform. We don't have to defend. We can just be. And in that safety, people bloom. Not always right away, not always obviously, but over time, consistently, truthfully. People respond to sincerity. Even if they don't say it, they feel it. You also begin to smile at life, not the perfect moments, but the ordinary ones. A cup of tea, a passing breeze, a small act of honesty. You no longer need the moment to be spectacular to feel grateful. You smile because you're here, because this breath was given, because this day, in all its imperfections, is still an invitation to show up gently. And when hardship comes, as it always does, you meet it differently. Not by pretending to be fine, but by refusing to let it make you bitter. You allow the sadness, You feel the loss. But the smile remains, not on your face, always, but in your posture toward life. A smile that says, even now I am not closing. Even when people disappoint you, even when plans fall apart, even when you feel unseen, you return to this smile. Not to escape your feelings, but to hold them with kindness. To say, you're allowed to be here, and I'm allowed to meet you without shutting down. This is not about being cheerful all the time. It's about being rooted, about letting your warmth come from the ground, not the weather. And when others are cold, when life feels heavy, your warmth remains. Not because you're trying to be strong, but because you've discovered something deeper than strength, peace that does not demand. And once the smile no longer asks for anything, once it flows freely, not as a strategy, but as a natural state, once warmth is no longer transactional, but a quiet way of existing, something else becomes visible beneath all of it. Not something outside, but something within. A flicker that has been quietly shaping your world, a distortion, a misunderstanding, a story the mind tells before truth arrives. And this is where fear begins, not with reality, but with the way the mind interprets it. Here we step into the wisdom of the rope that wasn't a snake. It's a simple story, but it carries a teaching that has shaped Buddhist practice for centuries. A person walks along a dim path at dusk and sees a shape on the ground. The shape is curved, long, and motionless. Instantly, the heart races, muscles tighten, breath shortens, fear takes over. A snake, the mind says. The person freezes or maybe runs. Only later, in clearer light, do they see it was just a rope. The snake was never there. The fear, however, was real. The reaction was real. The consequences were real. But the source, completely imagined. This is how misperception works, not just on forest paths, but in everyday life. The mind sees something. It could be a glance, a word, an unfinished message, and it fills in the blanks with the worst possibilities. It draws conclusions before asking questions. It projects old pain onto new people. And without realizing it, we spend years reacting to ropes as if they're snakes. This teaching is not just about seeing clearly. It's about seeing what's real before the mind adds its stories. Because the story can feel just as powerful as the truth. The body reacts, the heart closes, the mind defends. All from something that never existed beyond thought. Mindfulness helps us pause before the reaction. It creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, we begin to ask, is this a snake? Or is this a rope? Is this person truly ignoring me? Or is my past projecting abandonment into the moment? Is this failure really proof I'm not enough? Or is it just a temporary result shaped by expectation? Is this emotion a sign of danger or simply energy moving through? When we don't ask these questions, when we don't pause, the mind answers automatically and usually from old wounds. It says, I've been here before, I know what this means. But that knowledge is often a mix of assumptions, memories, and fears. It doesn't reflect the moment. It reflects the past. And this is how suffering continues, by reacting to shadows rather than what's real, by tightening before confirming, by avoiding instead of investigating. Fear loves quick decisions. It thrives on certainty. It doesn't want clarity. It wants control. But peace, only arises from seeing, and seeing takes patience. The practice is not to eliminate fear, it's to notice what's being feared and ask if it's true. This can feel strange at first. The reaction seems so automatic. But with awareness, you begin to notice that fear often arrives faster than the facts. Before you even know what's real, you've already reacted. The work is to bring attention back to the moment and look again, softly, slowly, honestly. And the moment you see clearly, something shifts. Not because the situation changed, but because you're no longer reacting to an illusion. You're no longer preparing for a threat that doesn't exist. And in that space, you breathe again. The body relaxes, the mind softens. Not from certainty, but from seeing. This applies to the inner world too. Many people walk around thinking they are broken. They look at a pattern and say, "I am this flaw." They see a difficult thought and say, "This is who I am." But that's another snake. The thought is not the truth. It's a shape on the ground, a habit of the nervous system, a conditioned whisper. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that sees them. And when this is understood, something deeper opens. Compassion, not as a philosophy, but as a necessity. Because you begin to see how often others are reacting to snakes too, how often they're afraid of things that aren't there, how often their anger is defense, how often their withdrawal is old pain. And suddenly, judgment drops. You stop needing to be right. You start wanting to understand. Not because you excuse everything, but because you finally see the truth. Most of us are hurting not from what is, but from what we believe it is. Most of us are carrying tension built on stories that were never checked. Most of us are running from ropes. Seeing clearly doesn't mean you never feel fear again. It means you don't let fear drive the whole car. You feel it rise. You pause. You look again. You ask, "Is this a snake or something I once mistook for one?" And often, that question alone is enough to break the cycle. This is how healing begins, not with control, but with clarity. You stop fighting the rope. You stop preparing for a strike that isn't coming. You stop wasting your energy protecting yourself from something that isn't real. And all that energy, it returns as calm, as focus, as peace. And this peace is different from the peace that comes when everything is perfect. This peace lives inside uncertainty. It lives inside the not knowing. It lives in the space where stories used to live. Not because you found the answer, but because you stopped reacting to the wrong question. Even in relationships, this shift changes everything. You no longer interpret every silence as rejection. You no longer assume every disagreement is a threat. You stop needing reassurance for things that were never actually unstable. You start trusting again, not blindly, but with open eyes, with awareness that looks first before it reacts. And in this looking, trust becomes internal. You trust your ability to pause. You trust your awareness to guide you. You trust that even when fear arises, it doesn't have to rule you. It can pass, it can soften, it can be seen for what it is, movement, not truth. The Buddhist path often comes back to this moment. See clearly, again and again, not with force, not with judgment, just with honesty. What is really happening here? Not what I think, not what I fear, but what is. This is the question that ends the need for questions. This is the seeing that dissolves the illusion. And once you begin to live this way, you feel lighter, not because life is easier, but because you're no longer dragging a bag full of snakes that were never real. You begin to meet each moment as it is, not as your history, not as your fear, but as something new, something you can breathe with, something you can live with. And once the rope is no longer mistaken for a snake, once the mind stops reacting to its own projections, once the heart begins to see clearly instead of defensively, another shift becomes possible, a gentler one. Not about deciphering, not about correcting, not even about understanding, just about being with, just about hearing without interference, feeling without commentary. This is not the mind's typical habit. This is the tree that listened to the wind. There is something sacred about true listening, not the kind where the ears are open, but the thoughts are already forming a response, not the kind where the silence is just a pause between retorts, but the kind of listening that has no agenda, no filter, no craving for control, just presence, just attention that rests rather than reaches. In Buddhist teachings, deep listening is not just a skill, it is a practice, a way of resting the mind in what is. When the mind stops labeling, measuring, interpreting, or preparing to reply, it begins to hear life in a new way, like a tree hearing the wind, not judging it, not planning against it, just moving gently with it, feeling the direction, the strength, the rhythm, and staying rooted all the same. This kind of listening is rare. Most people live in a constant state of mental response. Even when they appear to be listening, they are reacting inside, approving, disapproving, interpreting, preparing. The mind treats each sound as a puzzle to solve or a threat to manage. But mindfulness asks something different. What happens when you hear without needing to do anything about it? At first, this can feel passive, as if listening without response means disengagement. But it is the opposite. It is full engagement without interruption. It is allowing reality to arrive without obstruction. It is letting the present be heard before the mind adds its usual commentary. To practice this is to start simple. Sit somewhere quiet, close the eyes, begin to listen, not to any specific sound, but to all of it. The hum of a fan, a bird outside, the occasional murmur of your own breath. Don't name the sounds, don't organize them, don't compare them, just allow them. Let the ear be a doorway and the mind be a still pond, where each sound creates a ripple and then fades. Over time, this opens a new relationship to thought itself. You begin to hear thoughts as sounds, not as facts, not as commands, just noise passing through the space of awareness. You begin to realize that thoughts, too, can be listened to without reacting. You don't have to agree with every inner voice. You don't have to argue with it either. You can hear it. Let it move. Let it pass. This is inner listening, and it is deeply healing, because most of our suffering comes not from the sounds we hear, but from the mental noise we add to them. A comment becomes an insult. A silence becomes rejection. A look becomes judgment. But when we listen without labeling, we begin to hear more honestly. And with honesty comes freedom. Even in difficult conversations, this kind of listening changes everything. When someone speaks from their pain and you do not try to fix it, do not prepare a clever answer, do not defend yourself. You give them something few ever receive: space. Not empty space, but presence. The kind that says, you are heard, not managed, not redirected, just heard. And what's more important, this listening begins to extend inward. You begin to listen to your own body, not with judgment, but with attention. You feel tension without rushing to get rid of it. You hear the heartbeat without needing it to slow. You notice the breath without trying to shape it. This is how the body begins to relax, not by force, but by finally being heard. The mind, too, softens in this listening, when it no longer has to be right, when it no longer has to prepare, when it no longer needs to fill every silence with thought. It learns to sit, to be still, to listen the way a tree listens to the wind, rooted, quiet, aware. And this stillness brings a kind of intelligence that is not mental. It is intuitive. It doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in resonance. You begin to know things not because you figured them out, but because you stayed close long enough to feel them. Insight comes not from analysis, but from space, from listening until truth emerges on its own, like a breeze that arrives unannounced. In this way, meditation is not about escape, it's about tuning in, not to fantasy, to life, to this moment, this breath, this sensation, this thought, heard not as a command, but as a sound, held not as a truth, but as movement. The more deeply you listen, the less you need to speak, because you begin to see that most speech is a reaction to what hasn't been listened to. To listen is to end the chain, to sit beneath the noise, to become the tree that watches the sky instead of chasing the clouds. And this practice doesn't stay on the cushion. It moves into daily life, into your relationships, your work, your presence. You begin to respond with care, not with urgency. You begin to hear what people mean, not just what they say. You begin to sit with discomfort longer because you're no longer needing to fix every silence. You trust that what is heard fully often dissolves without intervention. This trust creates a new way of being. You no longer feel the pressure to solve every problem instantly. You no longer believe every discomfort is yours to eliminate. You stop rushing to give advice or defend your view. You begin to honor the power of attention itself, to let things be seen, to let people feel felt. And it works both ways. The more you listen, the more others feel safe to share. The more they feel heard, the less they need to shout. The more they trust your presence, the more honest they become. And this honesty builds something rare: connection without performance, dialogue without debate, peace without silence. Even your relationship to the unknown changes. When life brings uncertainty, you don't panic as quickly. You don't try to fill the space with noise. You pause. You listen. You feel the wind, not to control it, but to understand its movement. And you adapt, like a tree that leans without falling, that bends without breaking. And all of this begins with the simple practice of not labeling, not rushing, not preparing to speak, just listening, like a tree, like the earth, like something older than effort, something quiet enough to hear what most people miss. And now, the mind that once chased every thought rests. The heart that once demanded answers softens. The nervous system, once alert and tense, now melts into stillness. Not because every problem was solved, but because something deeper was remembered. Peace was never out there. It was waiting, beneath the noise, behind the thoughts, beneath the surface of everything. All this time, you've journeyed through the thought that didn't need solving, the silence that dissolved the inner critic, the monk who forgot his name, the breath that didn't belong to anyone, the goodbye that set the mind free, and so many more sacred pauses. Each one a doorway, each one a quiet reprogramming. Not to become someone else, but to return to what was never lost. And if something within you feels lighter now, hold that softly. If your breath feels slower, trust it. If your heart feels gentler, listen to it. You're not just falling asleep to teachings, you're awakening to yourself, slowly, kindly, without effort. Let these stories and metaphors live inside you now, not as concepts to remember, but as seeds to grow. In the silence that follows this video, let your sleep be a temple, let your dreams be free, let your waking be softer, let your mind remember that it no longer has to fight itself to find peace. If this journey touched you, leave a comment below with the words, "I found my stillness." It's more than a phrase, it's a signal to others walking this same quiet path, reminding them they're not alone. And if you want more of these soul-deep teachings to guide you night after night, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell. This channel is your space to return to again and again, whenever the world gets loud and you need the soft voice of peace to remind you that it's okay to let go. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being. May your sleep be deep and your awakening even deeper.